As you may know, I'm part of the Chilling family. Until Chilling, there was no dedicated platform for diverse and passionate horror fans to create content, listen to their favorite spooky stories, and meaningfully connect with other horror fans. We recently announced Chilling 2.0. Chilling's platform is growing, and you're invited to grow with us by becoming an owner investor. Chilling was bootstrapped to where we are today, reinvesting everything back into the platform. That means the community you've come to know and be terrified by was grown organically and become profitable with no outside investments. But as with all successful ventures, the time has come for us to supercharge our growth. This means opening our investing floor to new investors. We're launching an equity crowdfunding campaign on Republic, where investors just like you can purchase shares of Chilling and be part of our story. As we grow, so does your investment and your potential returns. Interested? Then check out the link below and join us. It's time to sit back and relax with your favorite drink and listen. A serial killer broke into my house. That isn't even the scary part. By H.R. Welch. It was around midnight, a few years ago, when I heard the sound of someone breaking into my house. I don't think I had more than 20 minutes of sleep, but as soon as I heard the window being broken, I was wide awake and looking for my phone to call the police. Unfortunately, I'd left it downstairs, charging in the kitchen, the source of the break-in. After psyching myself up to go downstairs, I saw the silhouette of a man sitting at my kitchen table. It was dark, so I couldn't see him, but the stink coming off the man was enough to curl my nose hairs. It was obvious even without the lights on that he was homeless. I was about to throw him out, but as soon as I turned on the lights, I couldn't help but feel bad for this stranger. He was sickly skinny, dirty, with long stringy hair that grew in patches and a matching beard. The way he sat there motionless, with tears forming in his 1,000-yard stare, it seemed to me that he'd given up on life. I was about to tell him to get out, but as soon as I opened my mouth, I noticed that he had a shotgun on his lap. I nervously asked him what he wanted, but he didn't answer me. Instead, he just sat still and stared straight ahead as if he wasn't even in the room with me. As a kid, I was instructed to give the homeless food instead of money, since they might buy booze or drugs with it. So instead, I decided to warm the man up with leftovers in the microwave. As I did so, I prodded the stranger with questions like if he wanted me to call anyone. Well, he didn't answer for a long time and hardly noticed the food I'd placed in front of him once it was ready. However, once he started talking, he told me a story that would change my life forever. He said his name was Cole Dyer, and admitted to killing 20 people. I'm not at all embarrassed to say that I cried and begged for my life at this point. This only angered Cole, who ordered me to shut up and sit down so he could tell me something. Doing what he said, Cole told me that his first victim was a hooker who he'd choked to death. This one wasn't killed like the others because he didn't know how he wanted to do it at the time, or for that matter, knew that he had a taste for it. After killing her, Cole expected someone to come by to arrest him, but after a while, with no detectives or police coming by, Cole figured he was in the clear. Finally having a way to vent his frustrations and no longer feeling like some cog in the machine, Cole's murderous fantasies took on a life of their own. Eventually he started to consider himself the pass-it-on killer. The reason Cole liked that name could only be explained by his twisted sense of righteousness and questionable moral compass, which was explained to me in great detail. Now the gist of it was that if he killed enough pests, good things would come back to him. Symbolizing this, he'd replace the head of his previous victim with the most current. Realizing killing people he knew was a sure way of getting caught, Cole learned what questions to ask complete strangers to discover the pests in their lives because, well, who didn't like talking about themselves? Cole explained that he was great at talking to people and could talk the devil into lighting himself on fire. Because of this gift, it was easy for Cole to learn where these people lived, worked, what they drove, and much more. Since the murders were spread out nationwide and none of his victims had any connection to the others, authorities were at a loss. They told the public they were chasing leads, but they never even questioned Cole about his hobby. It was at this point that Cole demanded that I grab a pen and paper and jot down this tale. Who was I to say no? Even though he had his hands on the table, there was still a shotgun in his lap. I didn't want to bet that it wasn't loaded or that I was faster than he was. The safe bet was just to write the story he was telling me and hope he'd show me mercy. While scouting for the 21st victim, Cole had found himself behind a small series of apartment buildings. It was here Cole started to shake as if he was scared. I heard a small group of people huddled around someone's basement apartment, whispering to whoever was inside. They were a ways away, so I couldn't make out the details at the time, but I could see that something wasn't right about them. They were dirty, long greasy hair and beards. There was something else about them. Something evil. One by one, they'd stopped their hushed whispering and turned their gazes towards Cole. This prompted him to return to his car, and on the way he dared a peek over his shoulder. When he did, they were following him, but stayed just out of the cone of light the street lamps provided. Creeped me out. I was already thinking of finding someone else to kill, because I don't like killing in apartment buildings. Too many neighbors, you know. When I saw them, though, that sort of settled it. I wasn't going to go back there. Kept looking back in the mirror on the way home to see if I was being followed, but in the 5-hour drive I didn't see a thing behind me. Next day, however, I noticed a car driving slowly through my parking lot every few hours. Smoking lots of weed at the time, and I figured I was just being paranoid. The next night I woke up to a tapping on the door. As Cole explained to me what happened next, he started to rock back and forth, the way I've seen children do in an effort to calm themselves down before continuing the story. Thought it was my imagination at first. Then I started hearing my name being whispered from the hallway. When I realized I wasn't imagining the noises, I looked out the peephole. Cole described at least 5 filthy and malnourished faces, partially covered by long, unkempt hair that did little to hide their dark, sunken eyes that shone with a kind of hate and sin that even the pass-it-on killer feared. They spent the entire night begging me to come out. In the building Cole called home, it wasn't uncommon to hear drunken exes pound on doors demanding to be let in, so their begging went on for hours. Eventually a neighbor Cole never bothered to get to know, but shed a thin wall with, decided to open the door to tell the strangers to keep it down. She stopped mid-sentence the moment she saw them, Cole explained. They pushed her back into her apartment and all piled in. They were tearing through her place for a while, and I could hear her cry, which caused them to laugh. If I didn't have a head in the freezer, I would have called the frickin' cops, man. Eventually, they made the woman call out to Cole, begging him to come out from his apartment. Cole could hear them telling her what to say. When she did, they'd laugh and instruct her to say it louder. When Cole refused to open the door or respond, they grew bored and started getting violent with the woman. First the sounds of punches and things getting broken, but then, Jesus, they were eating her. It was loud and wet and lasted until the sun came up. I didn't want to interrupt someone who was obviously crazy. After all, who knows how a madman thinks? The best course of action for me to take was to remain silent and allow Cole to go on for as long as he wanted. Cole didn't leave his room until noon. By then he was confident that they were gone and it was safe to leave. There was no way I was going to stay there. No frickin' way. Cole barely touched the meatloaf I'd heated up for him because he was too distraught. Considering how he looked, I thought he was going to inhale it. After packing his car and making sure to remember the head of his previous victim who he kept on ice, Cole went to some army surplus store to get what he needed to get away for a while. After Cole, this meant staying at a seedy hotel. About a week later, I was getting some grub at some grocery store. I was just walking in the parking lot and minding my own business, right? That's when I saw them again. Drove up right behind me and laid on the horn. I didn't even bother getting something to eat. I just wanted to get the hell out of there. By the time Cole remembered that he'd left the head of his previous victim back in the mini-fridge at the hotel, he'd already crossed 2 state lines. I could tell this bothered him. At this point of the story, Cole had to take a moment, and knowing that he had a shotgun on his lap, I gave it to him. Hoping that my kindness would be repaid and I could keep my head once he'd finished his tale, I poured him some milk and offered him the rest of the baby carrots I had in the fridge. Cole traded his car for a van shortly after that encounter, because there was no doubt that whoever was following him knew what he was driving. At least I could sleep in the van, right? Saves money on hotels and shit. It only took 5 weeks or so after trading in the van that Cole crossed his pursuers' paths once more. This time he was in deep sleep when he heard them say his name, causing his eyes to shoot open, immediately locking on the dark eyes of a woman with the same sinister resemblance as the man Cole had seen outside his apartment. However, without a beard, this woman's disfiguration was more noticeable. When she smiled, it was like she didn't have nearly enough teeth. The few that she had were small and brown and grew frickin' everywhere. Cole explained this as his dirty fingers fidgeted with the gun in his lap. Like the gums and the inside of the cheeks and shit. Even in the dark, Cole could see their black eyes glow with hateful light, and when he turned over the engine, the headlights revealed dozens of her family, standing 10 or so feet apart. Oh, someone naked, Cole explained, his eyes growing distant as he was reliving that painful memory. Well, they were standing still, smiling and just looking at me, like they were giving me permission to leave. Cole told me that he swerved to hit a few with his front tire, or to at least clip them with the van's fat ass. However, they all just stepped to the side, effortlessly avoiding getting run down. When I got the opportunity to ask what he meant by her family, he revealed that that was a recent term given to them. At the time he thought they were demons or vampires, but no longer thinks that's the case for reasons he didn't share at the time. After that encounter, Cole abandoned the van and stole a car. It was confessed to me that this is what he was doing whenever he felt that they were closing in on him, usually with the sensation of a tightening of his chest or his balls, triggered by anything from something he'd imagined seeing in the corner of his eye to the cries coming from a murder of crows. Zigzagging across the country, Cole made every effort to forever rid himself of these people and the hateful pulse that resonated from them. Cole would stay inside at night, and if he could, he'd sleep during the day. He'd pass the time by reading and listening to music. It was a surprise to me that he preferred classical, considering how he looked. Well, my shock must have been apparent, because Cole explained that Vivaldi's Concerto No. 5 was his favourite, and thanked his mother for getting him into tasteful music. While on the run, Cole would take odd jobs here and there to pay for what he needed to survive. A tractor assembly line in Michigan, a toll booth operator in Florida, and a semi-way station in Nevada. Whatever job paid him in cash, and as long as he didn't have to work at night, no matter where he found work, he would not stay long before feeling that they were closing in on him, and would more often than not leave before getting his paycheck. I'll spare you the details of what Cole felt he had to do in order to survive up to this point. Up to now, he'd been talking to me, a captive audience due to his shotgun on his lap, for well over 4 hours. The night Cole came to my house was shortly after leaving a place he'd stayed at for about 3 months, a loft above a bar in northern Canada. When asked why he'd want to live above a bar while on the run, Cole shrugged and said that he thought a bar full of people at night would keep him safe. When they finally arrived, they softly cried out his name from the back alley under his window. With all the music being played downstairs, Cole had no idea how long they'd been calling, but the moment he knew it was them, the giggling began. They flattered Cole by saying they were his biggest fans, and tried to prove it to him by telling him details that only the pass-it-on killer would know. Cutting off a head is hard. Even if you have power tools, it's messy shit. Took a while before I got the hang of it, though, Cole confessed, oblivious to my disgust. I rigged a bike pump up to a catheter, snaked it through the axillary nerve until it reached the superior vena cava. Only took about 2 minutes before the blood stopped flowing. By then, removing the head was pretty much blood-free. Cole swore to me that up to this point he'd never spoken to them, but that night at the bar he finally had enough and accused them of being vampires due to the fact they needed permission to come in. As soon as I said that, everything went silent. Must have been used to the sounds they were making, because I didn't notice it until it stopped. That's when someone with a strange accent told me that they weren't vampires, but in fact something else. Something that I... But Cole never finished this thought. In the silence that followed, I didn't know what he was going to do, and this terrified me. Might have been a lack of sleep on my part, possibly even momentary insanity, but I had to know who or what was chasing Cole. When I asked, he didn't answer, so I pressed my luck and asked him what else needs permission to enter a house other than vampires. Again, he didn't answer, and even though I knew it was a mistake to poke the bear, I started to ask again. As soon as the words started to leave my mouth, Cole reached into his inner breast pocket and pulled out what I thought at the time was paper napkins. After inspecting it for a moment, with an expression I've never seen before, Cole slapped them down on the table between us. Written on them in everything from pen to marker to pencil were the messages: "Let us in," "Open the door," and more. It's hard to tell what else was said because the writing overlapped. However, it was clear to me that these messages were written by dozens of people. As I picked up one to look at it closer and possibly ascertain what was written, my finger rubbed the glossy underside. Turning it over, I saw that it was a photograph, and in it Cole was sleeping in what appeared to be a small apartment. The next appeared to be him in an abandoned bus, a dirty attic, and so on. In some of the pictures, Cole looked 20 years younger. It made me wonder just how long he was on the run for. I know that stress can prematurely age people, but I had a hard time believing that the person in the picture and Cole were one and the same. Even though there was a part of me that knew what I was looking at, I needed to hear it from the man himself. But before I could ask, Cole said, "They don't need permission to enter someone's house," as he stared blankly into the empty space behind me. He sat there quietly for what seemed like an hour before Cole said anything else. When he did, it was as if he'd suddenly remembered that he was telling me a story and picked up from where he'd left off. The part where they then cut the power to the apartment and the bar under him. It didn't take long before the woman tending bar that night was shouting at them not to come closer. They just left. Tore her apart, and all I could do was wait until morning to come. Cole confessed this with a shake of his head as if to eject the thoughts from his mind. The thing is, Canada has some long nights during the winter. I only had enough food for a few days. Cole didn't tell me how long he'd stayed in that room for, and I didn't want to ask. It was obvious from the 1,000-yard stare that these events were still fresh in his mind, so I kept my mouth shut. When Cole left his room, he saw gore sprinkled everywhere, like a trail of breadcrumbs that started from behind the bar and led right to my apartment. Careful not to touch anything with his bare hands, Cole told me that he'd emptied the cash register and stole a toolbox from the back office so he could switch license plates whenever he felt the need to in the future to throw his pursuers off his scent. I don't know how to stop him. I think I'd have a good idea of how to slow him down, Cole said, but before he could elaborate, he noticed that the sun was shining through the window, and we'd been talking for hours. Thankful that he'd gone another night without seeing them, and having someone he thought he could talk to, Cole thanked me for listening. I didn't know what to say to such a story. What could I say? In the awkward moments that followed, I filled the void by rambling about whatever came to mind, eventually telling him about my boss and how he's always looking over my shoulder and wouldn't leave me alone. As if this was at all similar to Cole's own story. I didn't think anything of Cole asking me if I liked my job, or where I worked at the time, and soon I was answering all of his questions. After a short while, Cole thanked me. At the time, I assumed that was because I took the time to listen to him. Then he took my car keys off the counter and left without another word. Well, it might have been about 10 minutes after Cole left before I called the police, and all I said to them was that my house was broken into and that my car was stolen. After all, if I said anything else, it might have made me look as crazy as Cole. Maybe it was just me being tired, but I was truly afraid that the police would think I was insane if I told them the story Cole had told me. The more distance I put between myself and that night, the less real it felt. But then reality set in once I learned that my boss was found dead a few days later. According to the local newspaper, the Whisper Alley Echo, pieces of my boss were found all over his bedroom. Most people in town considered this to be a rumor to stir up newspaper sales, and I wanted to agree, but it was hard, considering Cole's tale. In the back of my head, the idea of what Cole told me being true kept teasing me. It bothered me so much that I ended up hiring a private investigator, a decision that I came to regret. A week later, I received a phone call informing me that my boss's head was found in the middle of another bloody mess all the way in Cleveland. Over the next few weeks, I kept thinking of the story Cole had told me. Those thoughts weren't front and center. They were creeping in the back, ready to pounce on a happy moment to turn it sour. Well, it didn't take long before I started seeing dark patches dart from one shadow to the next, disappearing as soon as I turned to look at it. At first, I chalked this up to being a mouse. The reflection off my glasses was just a lack of sleep. After all, it was much harder to sleep in a house that was broken into. Hoping it wasn't mice because of my hatred towards them, I bought some medicine in town so I could get some rest at night. It worked wonders when it came to getting shut-eye, but did nothing to stop me from seeing these shadows. With an embarrassing frequency, I'd imagine the reflecting eyes on the side of the road were Cole's night visitors, or think of them whenever I heard the house settle. It was as though toying with the idea of them being real was enough to invite them into my life. Well, don't recall what came first. Hearing my name being called out in public, the familiar sound of the cawing of crows, or the soft scraping at my screen windows at night. However, once I realized that the noises and the visions were real, there was no way to block them out. At night the soft whispers were hard to make out, and the more I tried to ignore them, the more they took center stage. I couldn't tell you how many nights I stayed up just so I could put my ear up to the wall, but I can tell you it was worth the effort because, unlike Cole, I know what they want. The first night I opened the door for them was terrifying, like losing one's virginity. And even with Cole's descriptions, there was no way I could have been prepared for their appearance, because they resembled the humans the way a shark looks like a minnow. During these conversations, they instructed me to share Cole's story with the world, so some of his madness could rub off on others, and season the meat. As long as I did this for them, they'd allow me to live. With that in mind, it's only a matter of time before they come and visit you. Maybe it'll start with seeing shadows in the corner of your eyes, the sounds of whispering, or something similar to the cawing of crows. And no matter how it starts, you should know it's the beginning of the end. Once you've been seasoned enough, they'll strike, and when they do, you can thank me. A better and more successful pass-it-on killer than Cole ever was. Dance for Your Killer by Jrubas. Part 1. For Natalie Harper, the day started with a call from her agent. Talking to some people at an ad agency, he told her in rushed tones. Nothing's final, but if all goes well, your face will be on every bus and billboard in the city. It was a rainy autumn day in New York. The cabs passing in the street kicked up sheets of dirty water, and carpets of red and orange leaves were plastered wetly to the sidewalks, making walking precarious. Grey dishwater light filtered through the window overlooking East 58th, and even with the heater on, the damp chill of the day seeped in between the cracks. Natalie, a tall, slim woman of 25 with blonde hair, a pert nose and high cheekbones, sat cross-legged in the middle of her bed, the white spread rumpled around her like freshly fallen snow. She was clad in a pair of grey lounge pants with little hearts printed across the fabric and a white tank top one size too big. As a struggling actress/model in one of the most expensive cities in America, she lived cheaply and bought her clothes second-hand. Natalie hated being poor, but it was only temporary. Her career was going to take off any day now, and she'd no longer have to wear ill-fitting clothes and eat glorified dog food from a can. Soon all of the fancy restaurants and high-end shops she passed on the Upper West Side would no longer be part of the scenery. They'd be places she actually went to, frequented, enjoyed. As she listened to David Klein, her chest swelled with excitement, and she unconsciously sat forward until she was on her knees. When will we know for sure? She asked impatiently. A week, David said. It really... He trailed off, and Natalie knew him well enough to know that there was a catch. What? She asked soberly. David sighed. Well, they want to see how you do in the play, and if you do good, they'll pick you up. He didn't have to say anything else. Natalie supplied the rest herself. If you don't do good, forget about it. And she sighed. She should have known there was a catch. Wasn't there always? She'd been in New York City for 3 years and had been waiting every single minute for a big break. She didn't want to wait any longer. She wanted to be rich and famous now. Now. Her eyes flicked to the tiny kitchen beyond the bedroom door. If she didn't get her fame and wealth by the end of the day, she'd have to eat ramen. Again. Just do your best, David said. Oh, listen, I gotta go. I'll call you when I hear something more. Natalie sighed. Yeah, all right. Ciao for now, he said. Bye. She ended the call and instantly made another one. Her sister Naomi answered on the third ring. It's like 5 a.m. here, right? Ignoring her, Natalie said, You're never gonna believe this. The line was quiet for a moment. What? Naomi asked breathlessly. She sounded tense with anticipation. It's about to happen. Naomi didn't have to ask what she meant by it. It only meant one thing. Her big break. Really? Naomi asked, wonder in her voice. Tell me all about it. Natalie and Naomi were twins. Two halves, you might say, of the same whole. They looked so much alike you might have trouble telling them apart. Their personalities, however, were night and day. Natalie had always been attracted to makeup and the color pink. Naomi was a tomboy, rough and tumble. Natalie was sometimes uptight and prissy. Naomi was laid back and earthy, at home in the woods or buried up to her elbows in the engine block of a Ford. Unlike Natalie, Naomi had never had a boyfriend, and Natalie sometimes wondered if her sister preferred women. Like most adult sisters, they were fiercely close. Closer than that, even. Years ago, beyond the rim of memory, their memory at least, their parents were killed in an auto accident. Together they were shuffled from one home to another. Sometimes they were with relatives, other times they were with strangers. For years they had no constant but each other. Natalie remembered her and Naomi hugging tightly beneath the covers in the cold of a dark winter night, each seeking to assuage the fear and loneliness they felt. They moved around so much they could never make friends and set down roots. They played and hung out only with each other, going around like two best friends who couldn't get enough of each other. In the beginning it was an act of necessity, but their shared experience had bonded them, and now they were as close as two sisters could be. Natalie almost didn't come to New York, because she couldn't bear the thought of being away from her sister, but Naomi all but made her leave. She knew how important Natalie's dream was, and she didn't want her to give it up. Naomi had always supported her, always believed in her, even when Natalie didn't believe in herself. These days, Naomi lived in California. They hadn't seen each other in almost 6 months, and Natalie was starting to get antsy. They needed a reunion, and soon. "Well," Natalie said, She trailed off, some of the delirious happiness draining from her as she remembered her agent's words. Naomi picked up on it immediately, because, well, of course she did. She could read Natalie like an open book. "What?" she asked. Heaving a sigh, Natalie said, "Depends on how well I do in this play. If I do really well, I'll get it, and if not..." She trailed off again. "That's all?" Naomi laughed. "You're great. You got this in the bag." Again, Natalie sighed. "Oh, I don't know. There's a lot of talent in that play. It's like some of the girls are so much better than me." Naomi was the only person to whom Natalie would reveal even the faintest whiff of insecurity. Growing up the way she had, Natalie had learned early on that if you show weakness, the world will eat you alive. She didn't have to worry about that with Naomi, though. Naomi was her other half. She could tell Naomi anything. "Look," Naomi said soberly, "you're great. You're going to get this gig. You just need to relax. If you get too worked up about it, you're going to make a mistake. Don't do that. Just go out there and work your hardest. I believe in you." Natalie almost laughed at her sister's cliched show of encouragement. "Thanks," she said. "Speaking of which, I have to jump off here and get ready." "All right," Naomi said. "Break a leg." "I will." "I love you," Naomi said. She spoke with fierceness and conviction. Natalie smiled. "I love you too." She hung up and threw her head back. As much as her sister's words had warned her, she still worried that she wasn't good enough. That was something she'd just have to live with. The show, as they say, must go on. Getting up, Natalie got ready for her date with destiny. Light, peppy pop music played from a radio on a folding table, and hot lights burned overhead, making Natalie sweat. It was late afternoon, and she and a half-dozen other girls, dressed in leotards, headbands, and leg warmers, were on stage practicing their dance routine for the play, an off-Broadway affair that had done fairly well on the West Coast. Rows of empty seats swept back from the stage, and the instructor, Ms. Mellows, walked back and forth like an animal trapped in a zoo, barking orders and waving her arms. "Higher, Lindsay!" she shouted. "Kick higher!" Lindsay tried to lift her leg higher and wound up falling down. Natalie smirked at her and kicked higher than Lindsay could ever dream. Lindsay was a USDA-certified prime bitch who thought her shit didn't stink. At 18, she was the youngest cast member, tall and slim with fiery red hair and big hazel eyes that always seemed to be plotting. She came from one of the city's richest families and believed she was better than everyone else because of it. Natalie tried to like the teenager, but she was such a snooty see you next Tuesday that she couldn't do it. Flushed with embarrassment, Lindsay glared. "No!" Ms. Mellows screamed. "No, no, no!" Everyone stopped, already knowing what was coming. Ms. Mellows stormed on stage and switched the radio on. Her nostrils flared and her shoulders rose and fell, lending her the appearance of a raging bull. "You have less than a week to nail this routine. At this rate, we're never going to be ready in time. I know you're a bunch of kids, but you need to get your heads out of your butts and get in gear, okay? Right, let's take it from the top." She went over to the radio, turned it on, and watched from the sidelines, her arms crossed. The girls went through the steps and motions with swan-like grace. Natalie watched Lindsay from the corner of her eye, willing her to trip over her 2 dumb feet. But she danced divinely, and Natalie hated her for it. In fact, she kind of hated all the girls who danced better than her, and there were many. Everyone has their own special talent, and everyone has an Achilles heel. Natalie's was dancing. She could walk and twirl like a cloud, but when she danced, she somehow managed to be mediocre at best. Other girls were more limber, more talented. She was middling, and when the entire cast was on stage, the audience's eyes were drawn away from her. She was a face in the crowd, and that made her mad. You wouldn't be wrong if you called Natalie Harper attention star. She craved the spotlight, and losing it for even a moment sent her into panicked hysterics. She'd do almost anything to be the one everyone looked at and admired, and she hated when someone took that away from her. Lindsay was the one who drew everyone's eyes the most, and Natalie couldn't stand it. Lindsay was the best all-around dancer, and she knew it. She would swish around the dressing room, making snide remarks about everyone else's form, and it would push Natalie to the edge. Natalie simply detested Lindsay, and hoped for bad things to happen to her, like twisting an ankle and having to drop out of the pageant. That would be marvelous. With her out of the picture, Natalie would have one fewer dancers standing in her way. All right, Ms. Mellows said, and waved her hand. That's enough for now. She cut the radio off again, and all of the girls came to a halt. I'll pick this up again tomorrow. You did good. Not great, but good. Coming from Ms. Mellows, that was a heck of a compliment. The girls broke and went behind the curtain. A white space backed against the stage and led to a row of dressing rooms, a communal locker room with showers and offices. Here the lighting was dim and shadows held sway. Natalie went to her dressing room, grabbed her gym bag, and went into the locker room. Naked girls strutted between their lockers and the showers, and steam filled the air. Her friend Melody, a pretty Asian girl with black hair and almond eyes, was rooting around in her locker, and Natalie sat on the bench behind her. My feet are killing me, Melody said. I don't think I could have danced another step. What's the point? Natalie asked darkly as she peeled off her shoes. Lindsay's going to make all of us look like chumps anyway. Melody rolled her eyes. She's not that good. Where is she anyway? Probably in her dressing room, Natalie said. She's too good to hang out with the rest of us. Slamming her locker, Melody stripped out of her leotard, revealing her firm young body. You need to stop being so negative, she said. You're a great dancer. That was funny. Compared to Lindsay, she was trash. She was trash compared to half the girls here, and every time she danced with them, it was clear to her that she was a loser. All her dreams of stardom would be dashed because she wasn't good enough. She didn't deserve the ad gig. Didn't deserve to be in this crummy play. And suddenly, she was very depressed. I guess, she said, because she didn't feel like talking about it. She just wanted to get dressed and go home to song. You are, Melody said. Natalie peeled off her leotard and dressed in a pair of grey sweats and a black t-shirt. She wore them because they were roomy and comfortable, and saw from practice she needed roomy and comfortable. Gonna shower? Melody asked. No, Natalie said. I'm gonna head out. All right, Melody replied. Don't let Lindsay bother you. Natalie smiled. I won't. They hugged, and Natalie left. In her dressing room, the door closed, Lindsay Ferguson stood under the faucet of her private shower, the water wetting her red hair and sluicing down her body like the touch of a timid lover. She spun around, letting the spray caress her back, then ducked her head underneath. She was sore and tired, but she felt good despite falling over earlier. She could tumble and stumble all over the place and still be better than the other girls. How they resented her. She could tell from the looks of jealousy in their eyes, and in the way they delighted in her rare missteps. They wouldn't be so happy to see her fail if they weren't worried about losing to her. Too bad they'd do exactly that. In the dressing room proper, the doorknob rattled and turned. The door opened a crack, the rusted hinges creaking like the mournful wail of a damned soul. A hand clad in a black leather glove slipped through, flexing like a spider stalking a hapless insect. Its fingers curled around the door and pushed it open just wide enough to steal in. Black shoes clicked on the floor as the figure deliberately made its way toward the shower. Its reflection flickered across the mirror, a quick flash of black fedora and a black trench coat. The brim of its hat cast its face in darkness, hiding its features save for its wide, frenzied eyes. He reached into the folds of its coat and pulled something out. It was a knife. Its handle was black, its blade so silver that it seemed to glow like quicksilver in the half-light falling from the bulbs trimming the mirror. The shower cut out, and the shape hesitated, and then stepped into the shadows. Throwing the curtain open, Lindsay stepped out of the shower and brushed her long, silky legs, her shoulder blades flexing. She grabbed a silky robe, shrugged into it, and went to the vanity, drying her hair on the way. She pulled out the chair and sat down. Behind her, the figure lurked. Sighing, Lindsay wrapped the towel around her head, picked up a tube of lipstick, and twisted the bottom. She looked at her reflection. That's when she noticed the intruder. A shocked gasp escaped from her throat, and her eyes widened. Like a spring-loaded surprise, the figure snapped forward, grabbing the towel and yanking Lindsay's head back. The knife flashed up, gleaming like a twinkling eye, and then came down, plunging deep into Lindsay's chest. Lindsay tried to scream, but it came out as a wet gurgle instead. The attacker pulled the knife out and dragged it across Lindsay's exposed throat. Coughing and gagging, Lindsay pressed her hands to the wound and fell out of her chair, landing on her stomach. The attacker walked calmly over and stood there, all boots and black pants. Her vision began to dim, and she knew in that moment she was going to die. In the backstage area, Natalie made her way toward the exit door leading to the parking lot. She nodded and said goodbye to a few of the stagehands and told Ms. Mellows it was a pleasure, even though today had been anything but. At the door she paused, checked her bag and realized she'd left her cell phone charging by the front office. She sighed and went back for it. In just the time it took her to come this far, the hallway had largely emptied out. Save for the hiss of the showers and the sporadic voices of the other girls in the locker room, the building was silent and dark. Natalie spotted her cell phone and went for it, stopping in front of the closed door to Lindsay Ferguson's dressing room, when a strange whimper sounded from within. Natalie's brow crinkled and she pressed her ear to the door. Another whimper. Oh, she imagined Lindsay crying over her fall, and an evil smile crept across her face. Oh yes, she had to see this. Grabbing hold of the knob, she twisted and pushed the door open. "Knock, knock," she said in a wicked sing-song voice. "You decent?" She poked her head in and looked around. The first thing she noticed was the red streaks and drops splattered across the mirror. Bottles of perfume and cold cream were strewn haphazardly across the table, as if knocked over in a struggle. The next thing was the body lying on the floor. Face white, eyes wide and staring. Lindsay Ferguson lay on her back, a gaping wound across her throat. The air left Natalie's lungs in a rush, and her skull swelled with pressure. A scream rose in her throat, and all at once she was so lightheaded that she could barely stand. Right before she lost consciousness and flopped to the floor with a thud, Natalie saw one more thing. Her own white and shocked face in the blood-speckled mirror. After that, she knew no more. Part 2. The day after Lindsay Ferguson was murdered, Natalie Harper checked out of the hospital, where she'd been admitted for observation the night before. She felt fine, well, just a little shaken, but they insisted on keeping her. That morning, before the nurse brought her discharge paperwork, a detective from the NYPD came to talk to her. A tall, olive-complexioned man with dark hair and deep-set eyes. His name was Inspector Argento. His partner, an older man with graying hair and jowls, was Inspector Fragasso. Natalie was sitting up in bed when they came. Inspector Argento sat in a chair by her bedside and held a notepad in his hand. Tell me exactly what happened." She honestly tried, but the whole thing was hazy in her mind. She remembered going into the dressing room, seeing Lindsay on the floor, and then passing out. "Well, that's all I can remember," she said. "Are you certain?" Inspector Argento asked. Natalie gave a jerky nod. "I'm absolutely certain." No sooner had those words left her mouth than a memory stirred in the back of her mind. She knitted her brow in contemplation and tried to bring it into the light, but it remained hidden, decked in shadows. "What is it?" Inspector Argento asked, animation creeping into his voice. I'm not sure," Natalie said at length. "I think, She trailed off. The memory receded into the mist and was gone. "What?" the inspector asked again. Natalie clenched and tried as hard as she could to remember what had happened. The only thing that came was an image of her face in the vanity mirror, droplets of blood splattered across it. She told him this and asked, Was there any blood on my face when they found me?" "No," he said. "There was some on the mirror. You must have seen your reflection." Now her head was spinning and she felt like she was going to pass out again. Thankfully, a nurse happened to come in at that very moment. She shooed the cops away so that she could rest, but not before Inspector Argento gave her his card. Call me if you can remember anything," he said. "Anything." Natalie nodded. The way he looked at her. Did he think that she did it? Well, she hated Lindsay, but not enough to hurt her. And she could see dark suspicion in his eyes. She tried to remember what she'd seen, what exactly she'd seen, but the memory was hazy, her mind trying perhaps to block it all out. She had a deep sense of dread in the pit of her stomach, as though she were forgetting something important. At home, she lay on her bed with her arms stretched out on either side of her, and a dazed expression on her face. The first thing she'd done upon getting home was call Naomi. Naomi listened in shock to Natalie's story, her silence deep and intense. "I have to remember," Natalie said. "I know I'm forgetting something. I can feel it." "But what?" Naomi asked. "You went over it a dozen times. If there was anything to remember, you'd have remembered it by now." "Maybe, but then again, maybe not." She thought back to her face in the mirror, blood splattered across her cheeks and forehead, a look of shock and horror on her face, as though she'd been caught doing something wrong. A terrible thought occurred to her then, and her heart sank into her stomach. What if she was the killer? What if she'd had some kind of jealousy-induced psychotic break, and she'd killed Lindsay? Her stomach turned violently, and she felt like she was going to be sick. That thought weighed heavily on her mind, making her stomach roil with sickness. She glanced at the clock on the nightstand and pursed her lips in thought. She had been planning to skip practice today, but now she thought that it would be better if she went. She needed to get her mind off what had happened. Lying here in this dark little apartment feeling sorry for herself would drive her crazy. After a hot shower, she dressed in a pair of jeans and a pink top. Outside, the street was busy, the tapestry of city sounds rising up around her like a fetid cloud of dust from an ancient mattress. The sky was overcast and trash blew across the wide street. The killer was still out there. Well, that thought flashed unbidden across her mind, and her stomach clenched. Who could it have been? Anyone could have slipped in, killed Lindsay, and then slipped out again. Or could they? Getting into the building wasn't hard, but moving through it undetected was. Unless you were part of the show, you'd stick out like a sore thumb. All the more reason that she, Natalie, may have done it. Natalie swallowed. No, it was Lindsay's boyfriend, she decided, or some guy who was obsessed with her. A real creep who stole her garbage and sniffed clumps of her hair from the shower drain. It wasn't a random thing, in other words. It was targeted, and it was over. Well, they saw no reason to cancel the play, so why should she see any reason to worry? The show must go on. 20 minutes later, dressed in her leotard, leg warmers, and dance shoes, Natalie stood on stage with the other girls. The atmosphere was heavy and somber, and no one spoke very much. Ms. Mellows walked back and forth like a general before her troops, her face ashen and drawn. "We're all upset over what happened to Lindsay," she said. "It was a terrible tragedy. I know that none of us will ever forget her talent or her smiling face. But this is show business, and the show must go on. Lindsay would want us to continue, so that's what we're going to do." She switched on the radio and Europop drifted from the speakers. Natalie went through the motions like a lapsed Christian paying lip service, her mind far away and her body unable to pick up the rhythm. None of the other girls' hearts seemed to be into it, but Natalie couldn't help noticing that some of them did better than others. The best was a Hispanic girl named Faith, tall and lean with her black hair in a ponytail. She'd been the second best dancer of the lot. Now that Lindsay was gone, she was the first. Second was Susie, a black girl with braids and an overbite. Natalie watched them from the corner of her eye, but she felt no jealousy, no resentment. After the horrors of the last 24 hours, being the best didn't matter anymore. None of this mattered anymore. Natalie stumbled and Miss Mellows jumped down her throat. "Natalie, come on. Is that any way to honor Lindsay's memory? You might as well just go dance on her grave." "Oh, sorry," Natalie mumbled. Overhead, a dark shape crept along a narrow catwalk, one gloved hand trailing along the metal railing. The fabric of its coat rustled with a sound like undead whispering, and its breathing was ragged, excited, the heavy panting of a predator closing in on its prey. When it was directly over the cluster of girls twilling and kicking below, it removed a knife from its coat and began to saw at a rope holding a sandbag. The blade gleamed like ice as it severed the rope strand by strand, and the killer's breathing grew heavier and hotter. The final strand snapped, and the bag dropped. The Hispanic girl looked up and gasped, and time seemed to slow to a crawl. The bag landed on her foot and burst, spewing sand across the stage. The girl let out a pained yelp and went down. Natalie whipped her head up toward the catwalk. A stinging ray of light blinded her eyes, but she was sure that she caught a flicker of movement above. Faith lay on the stage holding her foot and crying. Everyone surrounded her, and Miss Mellows fought her way through the crowd, kneeling next to the fallen girl. "Oh, Jesus H. Christ," the woman muttered. "Here, let me see." She moved Faith's ankle, and the Hispanic hissed in pain. "Goddamn idiots," Miss Mellows shouted at a stagehand who had come to see what had happened. "You're trying to kill someone." Natalie held up her hand to block the light and squinted. If there had been anyone on the catwalk, that was a big if, they were gone now. Miss Mellows and a stagehand picked Faith up and carried her away. "Right, keep practicing," Miss Mellows called over her shoulder. As soon as she was gone, the girls huddled together, each one of them looking up at the catwalk. "I always knew one of those things would fall down," Susie said, and shivered. "It always happens in cartoons," Melody agreed. Natalie went over to the remains of the bag. She knelt, sand gritty against her knee, and touched the rope. She looked up, her face a tight mask of anxiety. "Guys," she said, "look at this." The other girls came over and stood around her. "What is it?" Daria Porter asked. "Yeah," Tia Farris added. "What am I even looking at?" Natalie held up the bag, sand pouring from its ruined innards. She tapped the frayed piece of rope still attached. This was cut. Melody snatched the bag and studied the rope, then passed it to Tia. "It doesn't look cut to me," the Asian said. "Maybe," Tia said. "I mean, it could have been cut." Next, Daria examined it. "Nah, doesn't look cut. It just snapped. God knows how long it's been up there." Natalie got to her feet, crossed her arms defensively over her chest, and stared up at the catwalk. "I think it was," she said, and shivered. "What if it was the same person who killed Lindsay?" At the mention of Lindsay's name, the other girls fell silent. "The killer's still out there," Natalie pressed. "What if he isn't finished? What if he's coming after the rest of us next?" A tight band of fear closed around her chest, and she started to hyperventilate. "Bullshit," Susie said. "It was just an accident. Coincidence. It's not like this sort of thing has never happened before." Tia nervously chewed on her bottom lip. "I don't know, guys. Maybe Natalie's right." "No, Natalie's paranoid," Susie said. "You think she'd be happy that Lindsay's not around to make her look bad anymore?" Well, something deep inside of Natalie snapped. She lunged at Susie with a growl. Melody, Tia, and Daria got in between them. "Cut it out," Melody said. "There's no reason to fight like this. If Lindsay's killer is still out there, we won't get anywhere fighting." "It's probably Natalie," Susie said, "getting rid of the competition. Hey, my next Natalie?" "Oh, you fucking bitch," Natalie roared, and she tried to get to her, but the others held her back. Susie just crossed her arms and smirked. "Both of you, get a grip," Daria said. Pulling away from their grasp, Natalie stalked off. In the locker room, she slammed her fist into one of the lockers and paced back and forth, her teeth bared and her eyes hard with hatred. How dare Susie say that? How frickin' dare she? She didn't kill Lindsay. She didn't do anything wrong. She took a series of deep breaths and calmed down. She undressed, padded into the shower on bare feet, and stood under one of the shower heads jutting from the tiled wall. She turned the spray on and turned in a slow circle, letting the water pound on her body and soothe her tension away. She went back to the flash of movement she thought she'd seen on the catwalk, and a memory stirred in the back of her mind, stronger this time. There was something familiar about it all, about darkness. She tilted her head to one side and tried to figure out what that meant. Darkness. Shadows. The black. She was sure that the key to remembering what had happened was there, in the dark. Sighing, she turned around to face the shower head. All of a sudden, she felt like she was being watched. She darted her eyes down to the faucet, and that's when she saw it. An eye peeking at her from a tiny hole drilled in the steel. Her heart rocketed into her throat, and she jumped back with a skull-cracking scream. The eye disappeared. Ms. Mellows ran in. "What's happening?" Natalie could only point at where the eye had been. Ms. Mellows went over, squatted, and touched it. "Oh my God," she said. Half an hour later, Inspector Argento and a team of cops combed the building. The janitor, an old man with wispy hair and rheumy eyes, sat in a chair in the front office, his hands cuffed behind his back and his head down. The other girls clustered around the door, hoping to get a peek at the killer, but Natalie was too terrified to go near him. Inspector Argento took down her statement, nodding as she recounted her story, and then snapped his notebook closed. "Is he the killer?" Natalie asked. "Oh, we're not sure, but, The cop poked his head out of the janitor closet. "Hey, you, might want to come take a look at this." Over the course of an hour, the police found a dozen cameras hidden in the locker rooms and women's restrooms. They also uncovered a stash of videotapes, and as Natalie watched officers carry out armfuls, she shivered at the prospect of being on one of those awful things. The rest of practice was cancelled, and Natalie went home. The terrible burden that had been on her shoulders all day was gone, and her steps were lighter than before. She felt sick and scared, but somehow liberated. There was no doubt that the janitor was the killer. It was too much of a coincidence. Still, she had a nagging doubt in the pit of her stomach. At home, she kicked off her shoes and stretched out on the bed, hands lacing over her chest. She went back over the events of the past 2 days. She saw herself standing in the doorway to Lindsay's dressing room, everything save for the vanity swallowed up by the darkness. She saw Lindsay's dead, staring eyes, saw her own face, saw blood and terror and death. Her heart started to race, and she shook her head as if to dispel the vision. It was over, she told herself. The janitor was the killer, and he was in jail. If that was true, why did she still feel the cold breath of impending doom? She jumped when her phone rang. She shot it a nervous look. Reaching out, she picked it up and looked at the screen. The number was unlisted. Something told her to ignore it, but her thumb swiped across the screen anyway, and her traitorous hand lifted the phone to her ear of its own volition. "Hello?" she asked. Static. She started to ask again, but a low, hissing voice, so quiet that she almost couldn't make it out, issued forth. "If you know what's good for you, you'll forget what you saw." Natalie's heart sank. "Who is this?" she heard herself ask. "Keep your mouth closed, or you will die." A deep, biting chill spread through Natalie, and she started to shake. Her little heart pounded against her ribs, and tears formed like liquid diamonds in her wide, terrorized eyes. She dropped the phone as though it were venomous and wrapped her arms around her chest. When the shaking and hyperventilating had subsided, she did the only thing she could think of in a moment of trouble. She called her sister. On the other side of the country, Naomi answered sleepily. "Yeah?" she asked. "Naomi," Natalie burst in a whisper. "He just called me." "Who?" Naomi asked, sounding more awake now. Natalie shuddered. "The killer." She related the call to Naomi, and when she was done, she swallowed with a click. "What should I do?" she asked. For a thoughtful moment, Naomi was quiet. "Well, it sounds like he wants to scare you," she finally said. "He thinks you saw him." "Yeah, but I didn't," Natalie replied. "Well, I know, but he doesn't. Look, if he was after you, he wouldn't have bothered calling. He would have just done it. That tells me that he just wants you to be quiet." Natalie regulated her breathing, lest it got out of control again. "What should I do?" "Well, don't say anything to anyone," Naomi advised. "Don't give him a reason." "He doesn't need a reason," Natalie exploded. "He's nuts." "Well, even psychos have their logic," Naomi said calmly. "Look, I'm going to try and get some time off so I can come out there. In the meantime, don't say anything about the call. Don't tell the cops. Don't tell anyone. If he thinks you'll be quiet about what you saw, he'll probably leave you alone." And they hung up, and Natalie hugged herself again. She suspiciously eyed the phone. It didn't ring, and she hoped it never would again. Much later, Susie Atkins lay prone on her bed and paged through a fashion magazine, her legs bent and kicking behind her. Her phone had been blowing up all day with people wanting to know what had happened at practice, and it was really starting to get on her nerves, so she left it downstairs. Downstairs, an elongated shadow slid across the kitchen window. A figure dressed in black, its face hidden beneath the brim of its fedora, appeared at the segmented glass on the back door. It pulled out a knife, wedged the tip into the crack between the door and the jamb, and began to pry. After a few seconds, the door popped open and the killer entered, black boots clomping on the linoleum floor like the approaching hooves of some malignant creature. At the bottom of the stairs, the killer trailed one black leather glove along the banister. The cat was curled up on one of the treads, fast asleep. The killer didn't see it and stepped on its tail. It came awake with a loud, violent cry. The killer paused. In her room, Susie looked toward the half-open door. "Fatty," she called out. "What's wrong, boy?" Of course, the cat did not respond. Closing her magazine, Susie got up and walked to the door. The floorboard creaked furtively, and she came to a stop, her heart bouncing. That sounded like a footstep. "Hey, who's out there?" she asked. No answer. She walked to the door and froze when a shadow appeared on the wall. What happened next occurred in a dark blur. The door exploded open, and a form dressed all in black rushed in, a knife raised above its head. It wore a long coat, a hat, and a featureless black face covering. Susie screamed and fell back as the killer swung the blade. It cut through thin air with an ominous whooshing sound. Susie fell backwards onto the bed, and the killer scrambled on top of her, the knife raised. Susie threw herself to one side, and the blade plunged harmlessly into the mattress. Crying out, she shoved the killer off, got to her feet, and ran out of the room. The killer ripped the knife out of the bed and gave chase. Wailing, Susie ran down the stairs, the front door ahead. Salvation! She got there just as the killer caught up with her. The knife came down and grazed her arm, ripping her flesh and sending stinging red agony into her brain. She screamed and ducked away, running into the living room. The killer leapt over the couch in a single bound, landing on the cushions, and then flew at her, tackling her from behind and knocking her down. She screeched as the killer grabbed her by the hair and bashed her face against the floor. Once, twice, 3 times. The killer rolled her onto her back, mounted her, and grabbed her throat in both hands. Susie's air supply was cut off and her eyes bulged from their sockets. She tore and clawed at the backs of the killer's black leather gloves, her body thrashing. But the killer squeezed tighter, thumbs pressing into her trachea. Slowly, the fight ran out of her, and Susie's eyes rolled back in her head. For a long time afterwards, the killer squeezed, and when it was clear that the girl was dead, the killer stood, grabbed her by the feet and dragged her into the kitchen. Shoving the knife into one of the coat's big pockets, the killer went back upstairs and cleaned up any signs of a struggle. Back downstairs, the killer opened the kitchen door and dragged Susie out into the night, slamming the door with grim finality. Part 3. When Natalie arrived for practice that afternoon, she found the parking lot filled with police cars. As soon as she saw them, her heart began to pound and the sick feeling that had been present in her stomach ever since Lindsay Fergan was killed intensified. Her first instinct was to turn around and run home, to hide away from the nightmare her life had become. But instead, she went in through the rear door. The backstage area buzzed with activity, and before she could even get to the locker room, Tia grabbed her by the arm. "Hey, did you hear?" "What?" Natalie asked, chest clutching. "Susie's missing," Tia said. "Her boyfriend." Natalie gulped. Inspector Argento, clad in a grey suit, walked over. "Natalie," he said, "it's good to see you." "What happened to Susie?" she asked, without preamble. The detective sighed. "We don't know," he admitted. "It's likely she went off on her own. And these things happen." Well, maybe they did, but Natalie was dreadfully certain that Susie's disappearance was linked to Lindsay's murder. "I'd like to talk to you if you have a moment." Taking her by the arm, Inspector Argento led her into a conference room where a host of TV monitors were set up on a table. "We've been going over the footage from the janitor's cameras," he explained. "I'd like you to look at one." Natalie sat in an overstuffed leather swivel chair, and Inspector Argento sat beside her. He leaned over, rewound a tape, and pressed play. The screen was divided in 4. Top right was the rear entrance Natalie herself had just used. Top left was the door to Lindsay's dressing room, seen from the hall. The bottom right was the locker room, and the bottom left was the hallway. Inspector Argento pointed to the top right. "Watch this." For a second, nothing happened. Then a figure dressed in black darted from a bush to the door. Natalie's heart skipped a beat, and her fingernails dug into the padded arms of the chair. She noticed the timestamp. 5:10 p.m. "Yeah, but that door's locked after 5, she said. "I know," Inspector Argento replied. The killer produced a key from his coat pocket, unlocked the door, and slipped in. Natalie blinked. "There's only one person who has a key to that door," Inspector Argento said. "The janitor." On screen, the killer pressed his back against the wall and crept down the corridor, pausing here and there as if at a sudden noise. Finally, he disappeared into a dark alcove. Inspector Argento fast-forwarded the tape. Natalie saw herself and Melody in the locker room. The killer emerged from hiding, opened Lindsay's door, and went in. Again, Inspector Argento hit the fast-forward button. Natalie saw herself open Lindsay's door, and a moment later collapse. Ms. Mellows and a couple of stagehands ran over to help. That's when Inspector Argento hit stop. "I just saw this video for the first time a few moments ago. Did you notice anything?" Natalie racked her brain, and then it hit her. The killer didn't come out," she said. Inspector Argento nodded. The killer never left the room.
That means...
A few minutes later, Inspector Argento and a team of police officers searched the dressing room, looking for a way the killer could have gotten out. Natalie stood by the door with her arms crossed, not wanting to cross the threshold. She averted her eyes from the mirror and shivered.
"Inspector,"
one of the officers called. Just behind the shower stall was a vent guard, roughly 3 feet wide and 3 feet across. Inspector Argento traced it with his fingers, then removed it with the help of a cop. He took one of the officer's flashlights and climbed in. Inside, the shaft was coated with dust. Argento shone the beam of his flashlight around, looking for prints, but the killer had wiped the floor of the shaft clean.
I'm going in. I'm going ahead,"
he said over his shoulder. On his hands and knees, he crawled along the vent for 50 feet before coming to a T-shaped intersection. On the left, he saw nothing, but on the right, he could just make out a shaft of light. He crawled in that direction, and the light got brighter. The vent ended at another grate. Argento shone his light through the slats and frowned. Beyond was a wide space that could hardly be called a room. Sunlight cascaded in from a vent to the outside, and dust motes danced in the air. Pictures were tacked to the walls, and a sort of altar had been erected in the middle of the floor. Setting the flashlight down, Inspector Argento pushed the grate open. The drop to the floor was only a few feet, and after turning around like a car on a narrow street, he landed with a stumble. He grabbed the flashlight from the vent and pointed it at the wall. There were prints in the dust, recent ones. The killer had definitely passed through here. Argento ordered a full workup of the place, and inside of an hour, a team of CSI techs were dusting for prints and searching for other clues.
"How are you feeling?"
he asked Natalie, who stood against the wall hugging herself as though she were cold.
"I'm fine," she said. "I'm just..."
She trailed off, not knowing what to say.
"Yeah, I know the feeling,"
Argento said kindly.
"This sort of thing doesn't happen to you every day. Being in the middle of a murder investigation and all."
"Thank God for that," Natalie said. "I don't think I could handle 364 more of these." They shared a laugh, the stiff, uncomfortable kind that passes only between those who don't know one another well but find themselves thrust together by fate anyway.
"Yeah, you want to grab a coffee?"
Argento finally asked.
"I want to talk."
"Yeah, that's fine," Natalie said, not because she necessarily wanted to, but because she felt she had to. 15 minutes later, they were sitting across from one another at a coffee shop down the street from the theater. The place was tiny but empty, and the coffee was hot.
"Have you remembered anything about that day?"
Argento asked, taking a sip of his coffee. Natalie shook her head and crossed her arms defensively over her chest.
"No. I know I'm forgetting something, or..."
"Or what?" Argento asked. She thought for a long time, straining to recall what she'd seen on the day Lindsay was murdered. Visions swirled through her mind, but they blew away as quickly as they came, like little puffs of smoke on the wind.
"I don't know,"
she finally said,
"but there's something that just... something I'm missing. I must have seen something important, or the killer wouldn't have..."
Realizing she'd said too much, Natalie cut herself off. If she'd hoped that Argento wouldn't notice her blunder, she was sadly mistaken. His eyes narrowed and he leaned over the table, putting her in mind of a bloodhound who'd just picked up a scent.
Well, the killer wouldn't have what?
All of the stress and fear Natalie had been feeling over the past few days surged out of her, and tears flooded her eyes.
"He called me,"
she said, her voice cracking. She told Argento about the call, and when she was finished, he snapped.
"Why didn't you tell me?"
"I was afraid," Natalie said. "He might come after me if he knows I told."
"Well, he's already coming after you,"
Argento said and sat back in his chair.
"He must think you saw him."
Sighing, Natalie insisted.
"I didn't. No, I didn't see him. I would remember that."
"You sure?" Argento asked. That gave Natalie pause.
"Yes," she said, finally. But she wasn't sure. Argento ordered 24-hour police protection for Natalie just in case the killer came for her. He also put an electric tap on her cell phone in the hopes that she'd get a call back. That night, Natalie sat by her bedroom window and looked out at the street, where an unmarked car sat parked at the curb. 2 detectives were inside. Even with them out there, she didn't feel safe. She rubbed her arms and shivered at the chill only she could feel. And when a knock came at the door, she jumped. For a long moment she stared at the open bedroom door, every light blazing beyond. She held her breath and listened, hoping it wouldn't come again, that she'd just imagined it. When it was repeated, her stomach sank and cold terror crept over the back of her neck. He was here. Natalie didn't realize she was on her feet until she was poking her head out of the bedroom door. The knock came again, and she drifted to the door like a woman in a nightmare. Her heart thundered in her chest, and trembles raced through her lithe body. She reached the door and peered through the fisheye lens. In the hall, Inspector Argento held a pizza box. Natalie relaxed and opened the door. "I was joking about the pizza," she said with a grin that she couldn't suppress. Earlier, Argento had called and asked if she needed anything. "Yeah," she'd replied. "Pizza would be nice." The detective darted his eyes from her to the box and back again. "Oh," he said. "Well, I'll just eat it then." He started to walk away, but she stopped him. He flashed a smile that let her know he was kidding and came in. They sat at the little dining room table next to the front window, the pizza box open between them. They didn't bother with plates. Argento offered to grab them a couple, but Natalie declined. They didn't need plates, and she really didn't need a skinful of dishes to wash, even if the sink were only full of 2. Argento looked around the apartment as he ate, his brow furrowing critically. He was kind of cute, Natalie thought, and shocked herself with the levity of that thought. "I guess this is the part where you tell me what a nice place I have," Natalie said, breaking the awkward silence they'd fallen into. No," he said. "It's pretty mediocre, actually," he replied. Natalie was shocked into a laugh. "Okay. Wow. Mediocre?" No offense," the detective said with a trace of a smile. "I've been inside 1,000 apartments in this city. They all look the same. Some are nice, some are shit, others are—" And he shrugged. "Mediocre?" Natalie supplied. "Yeah, that." And they lapsed into the uncomfortable silence of strangers once again. "How long have you been a cop?" Natalie asked, to make conversation. 10 years now," Argento replied. Natalie tilted her head quizzically to one side and regarded him with a critical expression. She hadn't given any thought to his age, but now that she looked at him, really looked, he struck her as too young to have been a cop for so long. His features were rugged and manly, but there was a certain softness around the edges that suggested he was still in his 20s. "When did you start?" she asked. "When I was 20, Argento replied. "So, you're 30? Argento took a bite from his current slice of pizza and nodded. "Yeah," he said, around a mouthful of food. "Time flies when you're having fun." They were just finishing up when Natalie's phone rang. Natalie jumped in surprise, and Argento's face instantly changed, transforming from open and restful to hard and alert. She looked at him with wide eyes, her heart beginning to pound, and he looked back. Both of them were thinking the same thing. It might be the killer. "Get it," Argento said lowly, as if the killer were nearby listening. Natalie shook her head. "It might be him." "I know," Natalie replied. "Why do you think I don't want to answer it?" He shot her a stern, almost paternal look, and Natalie sighed. If they were going to catch the killer, God knows she wanted that more than she wanted almost anything, they would need clues, a lead, something. If it was him, they could trace the call and find out where he was. Even so, the thought of talking to him, of hearing his mad, rasping voice, sent shivers down Natalie's spine. Finally, she forced herself up from the table and went over to the couch, where her phone lay in wait, the screen lit up. She gulped, picked it up with trembling fingers, and read the caller ID. At once the tension rushed out of her, and she smiled. Argento noticed the change, and he too relaxed. "Hey," she said. "How are you?" Naomi asked without preamble, worry in her voice. "Oh, I'm fine," Natalie said. She came back to the table and sat down. "I'm with a cop right now. He'll protect me." She shot a smug little smile at Argento. "Well, that's what our tax dollars pay him for." On the other line, Naomi rolled her eyes. Natalie couldn't see it, but she knew she'd done it regardless. "Well, I'm glad you're in a good mood. Meanwhile, I'm going crazy out here. I put in for a couple of days off, and I'm coming out there, whether you like it or not." "No, you don't have to," Natalie said. Honestly, however, having the comforting and steadying presence of her sister would be nice. She wouldn't feel so alone and afraid. "Yes, I do," Naomi said. "Hey, where's this cop? I want to talk to him." Naomi's almost motherly concern made Natalie laugh. She put Naomi on speakerphone, and they had a three-way conversation with Argento, Naomi pumping him for answers on every aspect of the case. "He's only picking on Natalie because she saw him," Naomi said. "Or thinks he did." "Yeah, that's about the size of it," Argento replied. "So there's one murder and a missing person," Naomi said. "Yep," Argento replied, "and there's no evidence that they're linked." "Yeah, but that'd be a hell of a coincidence," Naomi pointed out. Argento nodded, conceding her point. "Yeah, it would be, but we have to go on what we know for sure. Someone took out Lindsay Ferguson. A jealous boyfriend, maybe, or some girl she had a beef with. Whoever did it thinks Natalie saw them. Now they want to terrorize her into silence." "Which is a good sign," Naomi said. "If he's bothering to do that, he's not planning on killing her." "Right," Argento said, looking at Natalie, who hugged herself tightly. He didn't say so out loud, but there was, of course, the fact that the killer could change his mind and come after Natalie anyway. At the present moment, however, it seemed that he wanted to avoid doing that, which suggested to Argento a personal connection between him and Lindsay. He, or she, had a reason to kill Lindsay, but was hesitant to kill Natalie. That was also part of the reason Argento didn't think the disappearance of Susie Atkins was related. If the killer was pussyfooting around with a witness, why would he go off and kill someone else? Didn't make much sense. "We're doing the best we can," Argento said. "I give you my word, I won't let anything happen to your sister." His and Natalie's eyes met, and she smiled weakly. The fear of the last several days had taken its toll on her physically, but she was still just as beautiful as she'd been when Argento had first met her. Her clear eyes were tired, but still sparkled regardless. Her blonde hair seemed a shade paler, but she shimmered in the light. When he called her earlier and she asked for pizza, he recognized the sarcasm in her voice. Had she been anyone else, he would have laughed, cracked a joke about handing the call over to the NYPD's Grubhub division, and forgotten about it. But not with her. He went out and grabbed that pizza and came over. Why? Well, because it gave him a chance to be with her. "Yeah, I hope so," Naomi said. "This is a bunch of bullshit and I'm worried sick." Natalie laughed. Naomi had said something about her being in a good mood, and for the first time in days she really was. It seemed strange, blasphemous even, to not be afraid in the midst of this whole crazy mess, but right now she wasn't afraid. Argento was here, and there were cops downstairs. Argento was probably right. The killer just wanted to scare her. As for Susie, well, surely she wasn't connected to this. Natalie had to believe that. After saying their goodbyes, Natalie and Naomi hung up. Argento sat back in his chair and looked at the pizza, considering another slice, but ultimately rejecting it. "Well, better go," he said. Natalie felt a pinch of fear, but said nothing. She didn't want him to go. She felt safe with him around. At the door, he said, "I'll check back in tomorrow." "Okay," Natalie replied. "Oh, bring breakfast." She smiled to show that she was joking, at least partly. "All right," Argento said. "You're on." He left, and Natalie locked the door behind him, engaging both the deadbolt and the security chain. She She walked around the apartment and checked the windows to make sure they were locked. A little bit of the cold fear she'd felt earlier crept back in, but Argento's calming presence lingered around like a warm hug. She checked the door one more time and pronounced herself secure. There was no way the killer could get in. Unless he was a ghost. Well, she meant that as a joke, but she felt a little twist in her guts. Not fun, Natalie. Not funny at all. Part 4. That evening after practice, Tia Ferris met up with Daria and Melody in the locker room. "Yeah, I'll catch up with you guys later," she said. "I want to take a quick shower." Melody lifted her brow. "What, with the killer on the loose? That's dumb." "Oh, they caught the killer," Tia said. "It was the janitor." "You sure about that?" Daria asked. "Oh yeah," Tia said. She pulled her leotard down, stripping shamelessly in front of her friends. "Why else would the cops be here today? They were looking for evidence. Probably told them about something in here." "Oh, I don't know," Melanie said. "I'm not hanging around." Halfway to the shower, perky butt bare, Tia looked over her shoulder. "Oh, go on then." Melody and Daria looked at each other, then fled, leaving her alone. God, what wusses. Tia laughed and got into the shower. She turned one of the faucets on and stood beneath the spray, the hot water beating down on her body. Well, she didn't show it. She too was rattled by all that had happened, but she didn't let things get her down. Her dad always said you have to suck it up and power through, and that was exactly what she was going to do. When she was done, she cut the spray, grabbed a towel, and wrapped it around her body. She went back to her locker on bare feet. The building was silent, the shadows deep. She was almost to her goal when the overhead lights cut out. Her heart jumped. "Hey, I'm still in here," she called, her voice echoing. Nothing happened. "Didn't you hear me?" she called again. "I'm still in here." Apparently no one was going to turn the lights back on. She took a moment to let her eyes adjust to the darkness, and then went to her locker. She opened it and froze when she heard a rustle of fabric off to her right. Her breath caught and she craned her neck. "Who's there?" she called. No one. It was nothing. Just her mind playing tricks on her. She grabbed her clothes and sat them on the bench. Tia's blood ran cold. A shuffling footfall sounded, and she turned around just as a shadow broke from the night and rushed out at her. She saw the gleaming blade of a knife flashing down, and she reacted on instinct, raising her arm. The blade sliced her forearm open, and all at once she was running, a loud scream trailing behind her. The killer ran after her, his coat fluttering around his knees and his heels clicking on the floor. In the hall, Tia went right, her bare feet flying over the cold floor. Ahead, an exit sign glowed like a beacon of hope. She made it to the door and tried to push through, but it shuddered in its frame. It was locked from the other side. Trapped like an animal, she spun around. The killer was calmly walking toward her. In the rusty red light cast by the exit sign, he looked almost like a demon coming from the pit of hell, a black fedora perched on his head and a black void where his face should be. He held out his knife, and a sob escaped Tia's throat. She ducked to her right and ran down a set of concrete stairs to the first floor. The lights were out down here, and the hall lined with offices and classrooms where actors learned their craft. Panting and crying, Tia bolted to a set of double doors, but those were locked too. A heavy metal chain threaded through the handholds. She went right, then left, gasping for air and never looking back. Finally, she ran into a classroom and crouched next to a table, fighting to keep from breathing too hard and alerting the killer to her presence. When she heard the footsteps, her heart sputtered and she pressed deeper into her corner, willing herself to turn invisible. Holding her breath, she listened. Finally, the killer appeared in the doorway, the knife clutched in one hand. Tia winced and damned her pounding heart. Surely the killer would hear it and come right to her. Instead, the killer made a slow, deliberate circle of the room, looking under desks and beside filing cabinets. At one point he came so close to Tia that she could reach out and touch his leg if she'd wanted to. At last, he gave up and left the room. Tia blinked, unable to believe her good fortune. She waited a long time before getting up and creeping into the hall. She listened closely, heard nothing, and let out a sigh of relief. She then turned around, and the killer slammed his fist into her face, knocking her down. She hit the floor, and he was on top of her, the knife cocking above his head. She screamed and thrashed in vain in an attempt to buck him off. The blade swung down and pierced her chest. Blood rushed into her lungs, and her screams took on an agonized quality. The killer stabbed her again and again, raining blows down on her. Finally, he stuck the blade into her heart, and it stopped mid-pump. The last thing she thought was this. Melody and Daria were right. This was dumb. When she was dead, the killer went into a nearby janitor closet and came back with a heap of washcloths. He mopped up the blood and fetched a large burlap bag from the stage department. He went back downstairs, crammed Tia's body in, and dragged it up the stairs. Tia's head clunked on each tread, and her hand trailed limply behind them. Outside in the cool night air, the killer pulled a hacksaw from a bush and went to work. By the end of the night, Tia would wind up in the swamp, next to her friend Susie. Now, it was almost finished. It was almost play night. The night of the big play, Natalie Harper stood in the locker room with Melody, Daria, and the other girls, worry gnawing at her chest. It had been several days since Tia went missing, and Natalie had been on pins and needles ever since. But nothing else had happened in the meantime only served to heighten her sense of dread. The air seemed to crackle with dark anticipation, and suspense built up within her like a pressure cooker. One girl going missing might have been a coincidence, but not two. Argento was convinced that the killer was still active and that both girls had been murdered. Each evening he came by the apartment after his shift and spent an hour or two with her, keeping her up to date on the investigation and trying to cheer her up. It had worked to an extent. After the first few days, Natalie's nerves calmed. Naomi would be there in a couple of days and everything would be okay. Her sister would make sure of it. The janitor confessed to setting up the cameras, but vehemently denied killing Lindsay. He'd been in jail ever since and had been ruled out as a suspect, since there's no way he could have killed Tia if she were dead. That afternoon, Natalie and Inspector Argento had lunch together. "You're spoiling me," Natalie joked. "Dinner, breakfast, now lunch? Either that or you're fattening me up." Argento grinned. "Maybe. You dancers are too thin anyway." He noticed the look of hurt in her eyes and recovered. "Not you. Look, you look great." He stumbled over his words like a nervous boy. "You guys just, you go through a lot to do what you do." Well, he wasn't wrong about that. Natalie practiced hard and virtually starved herself at times, but that's just what you had to do in order to get ahead. Maybe it wasn't right, and maybe it wasn't fair. That's just the way it was. And you got a lot further in life playing the game by its rules than you did by whining about those rules. "Yeah, it's all worth it in the end," she said. Their conversation, as always, turned back to the murders. Of course it did. This wasn't a social call, even if Natalie sort of wished it was. He asked her to go over Lindsay's murder again, and she did. He listened intently, his head cocked to one side, as if to filter the information through his brain. Well, there was one detail that wouldn't come. It stuck fast to the anterior wall of Natalie's mind, like a bit of food stuck in her teeth. She closed her eyes and recalled everything. "My face," she said. "It was funny." "Funny how?" Inspector Argento asked. She crinkled her brow in contemplation. She visualized the mirror and her own blood-splattered reflection. "I don't know, like it was floating in the darkness."
Inspector Argento hummed. Floating? Tentatively, Natalie nodded. I think that's it, but, well, I feel there's more to it. More than I'm not remembering. Argento paid the check and walked her to practice. Look, I want to ask you something, but I know what you're going to say. Natalie looked at him. She might have thought that he was asking her out. Yes, she would say in an instant. What? He was quiet for a moment, the city sounds swirling around them. Honking, jackhammering, the low murmur of people talking to each other on their cell phones. Drop out of the play, he said. It's too dangerous. No, Natalie replied. And that was that. No amount of convincing could change her mind. You don't understand, she told him as they approached the theater. My entire future is counting on this play. I can't back out, killer or no killer. Argento sighed. I knew you were going to say that. Well, then why did you ask? She teased. He shrugged one shoulder. Figured it was worth a shot. Now, 15 minutes before the show was to begin, Natalie took her things from her locker and started for her dressing room. But Daria stopped her. Hey, do you mind if I take the big dressing room? Daria asked. I want to shower in there. Well, Natalie's dressing room had a shower, but Daria's did not. Normally, Natalie would have told Daria to buzz off. That dressing room was nicer and better. Therefore, it was hers. Tonight, it didn't matter. Who cared? When death passes close to you, trivial things cease to matter as much. Sure, Natalie said. Thanks, Daria replied with a wan smile. I'm just, She shrugged. Nervous? Asked Natalie. On edge, Daria corrected. The last time I saw Tia, she was in the shower out here. Well, Natalie understood her point. She felt safer in her dressing room too, even though she shouldn't. I mean, wasn't Lindsay killed in her dressing room? Leaving Daria to it, Natalie made her way to the smaller dressing room down the hall. She opened the door, turned the light on, and looked around. She checked every corner, nook and cranny, and when she was satisfied that the killer wasn't there, she shut and locked the door. She carried her bag over to the vanity and sat down. Time to do her makeup. In the auditorium, the audience had begun to take their seats. In the middle row, a pair of black leather gloves gripped the back of a chair and pushed the killer to his feet. Moving sideways past people who'd already sat, the killer went out into the hall. Ducking into a classroom, he donned his coat and hat. He went to a vent, produced a screwdriver, and unfastened the screws. Setting the vent cover aside, he crawled into the ductwork and slithered silently through, coming to another vent cover. Previously, he'd taken out the bottom two screws, so that all you had to do was lift it out of the way. Dropping into the darkened hall near the exit sign, the killer went to the door of the small dressing room, took out a key, and inserted it into the lock. Natalie wrapped her hair in a towel to help it keep its form and applied eyeliner to her eyes. She didn't see the door opening in the mirror, didn't realize the killer was creeping toward her, bent slightly at the waist, knife stuck out before him. At the last possible second, she caught a glint in the mirror and spun around with a gasp. The killer raised the knife and then froze. For a second, Natalie stared up at the countenance of the killer in shock. Her brain couldn't compute what she was seeing. Has she gone mad? Then, all at once, she remembered. Her face had seemed to float on a cloud of darkness in the mirror because it wasn't her face at all. And the killer wasn't a he. Naomi? She asked. The knife clattered from Naomi's hand, the look of horror on her face almost identical to the look of horror on Natalie's. The little grease monkey wore a black trench coat and a black hat like something from an old noir movie. Her face, you could say, floated on a cloud of darkness. Natalie, Naomi said with a quiver.
She fell to her knees and took Natalie's hands, making the beauty queen jump.
I didn't know it was you. I didn't know.
What are you doing? Natalie asked breathlessly. A crazed smile skipped across Naomi's lips, and her eyes shone with madness.
I'm helping you, Natalie. I'm helping you be the best dancer.
Natalie's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out.
I did this for you, Natalie,
Naomi said madly. Her eyes were wide, frenzied, and the corners of her mouth turned up in a smile that somehow managed to be both sinister and bemused.
I did this for you.
No, Natalie whispered. The terrible truth was beginning to settle in. All the times that she complained to Naomi about Lindsay and the others being so much better than her came rushing back, and the revelation that Naomi had done all of this for her crushed her.
No.
Naomi ran her hands over Natalie's shoulders, up the sides of her neck to her cheeks, the leather cool and slimy on her skin.
Now you'll be the best. You'll be the best and everyone will love you.
Breaking down, Natalie began to cry. Naomi's face darkened.
You aren't happy? You aren't happy that I did this?
Her hands crept to Natalie's throat, and suddenly she was squeezing with all her might. Natalie's air supply cut roughly off, and her eyes bugged out. Her back arched spasmodically, and she tore at the backs of Naomi's gloves. The killer's grip was like iron, and nothing would stop her. Natalie choked, kicked, and scratched at Naomi's face, but the little madwoman's mask of stony hatred remained unchanged. Just before Natalie passed out, Inspector Argento and 2 uniformed police officers ran into the room. Naomi unhandled Natalie and spun around to face them. Inspector Argento raised his gun and fired. The first round struck Naomi in the chest, knocking her back a step. Her gloved hands clamped over the wound, and a look of shock filled her eyes. The second tore out her throat in a spray of blood and spun her around. She flopped face first against the floor, tried to crawl, and then went limp. Natalie broke down, her sobs so powerful that they racked her body with violent shudders. Argento shoved the gun back into its holster and rushed over. He dropped to his knees and took her in his strong arms. "Shh," he said. "It's over. You're all right. It's over." Across the room, Naomi's body stared sightlessly up at the ceiling, her lips frozen in a crazed smile. It was the face of a madwoman, of a killer, of a little girl who would do anything for her sister. When one looks long into the abyss, they may find the abyss looking back. Friedrich Nietzsche. I once saw people getting murdered. Thing was, I saw it happening through someone else's eyes. My corpse child. I thought they were just weird dreams at first. You know, just one of those instances where you have a vivid dream, one that you'd swear was real, only to wake up and say, No, that shit happened. Go back to bed. We've all had those, right? I know I did anyways, back in the day. Of course, they were usually far more innocent and benign. A bit wacky, actually. Like the one where I'm attending a comedy show, but with Muppets being the comedians, and the actual people taking their place as the ventriloquist dummies. This, though, well, this is nothing like that. Something I realized later on. I think I was maybe 16 or 17 when it first happened. Remember, it was a Friday night. I'd just gotten home from cheerleading at the football game. Everything had gone all nice and smooth, even managing to get a little under the bleachers time with my crush at the time, Danny Rudd, after the game. And I was ending the night with a nice hot soak in the tub. My folks were out for the night, so I had the house to myself. I remember feeling so relaxed, lying in the piping hot water, my head rested back and my eyes closed. And I was asleep before I even knew it. I guess that's what got me, really, at first.
The fact I didn't know I was actually asleep. I just remember one minute, everything's all fine, and the next, I'm seeing Danny being repeatedly stabbed. It was abrupt. All of a sudden I was seeing Danny splayed out across the ground in a dark room, one I couldn't make out any real features of, while a knife was being plunged into his chest over and over. Danny was convulsing violently, coughing up a fountain of blood. The last thing I saw was him slowly, shakily raise his arm, pleading for mercy as the knife came down again. That's when I started violently in the bathtub, almost springing straight to my feet. That caused me to slip and crack my head against the wall. Well, I was fine, save obviously a bitch of a headache, but I was shaken up much worse with what had just happened. It was almost 4 o'clock the next morning before I was actually able to fall asleep, constantly tossing and turning. Every time I tried closing my eyes, I'd see Danny's beaten, bloodied face reaching out to me. To him, whoever it was holding the knife. See, that was another thing. I didn't know exactly what it was I was seeing. In other words, I couldn't tell if I just imagined it was me stabbing him, or if it was something else. Well, for the record, I'm not the kind of girl who'd fantasize some shit like that, getting my rocks off and killing my crush or anybody else for that matter. I wasn't then, and I'm not now. I'm not a violent person either. Hell, I've only gotten into fistfights and hair-snatching matches with my older sister, Megan. But then, well, what the hell was that? At the time, I answered that question with a classic, too much binging Dateline late at night excuse. I'd have probably stuck to that too, except that the next morning, a breaking news report came on about a high school student being reported missing only a few hours ago. And of course, Welch's photo and name appears, but Danny's. Witnesses say the missing boy, Daniel Preston Rudd, was last seen at a varsity football game at West Lincoln High. At this time, witnesses claim they didn't remember seeing him leave. Authorities are continuing to search the area. If you've seen Daniel or have any leads as to his whereabouts, we urge you to call and submit an anonymous tip. I turned the TV off. My stomach was cutting backflips. My heart was beating stupidly fast. Calm down, I told myself. He's fine, and you know it. He probably just went to the bar or something and got shit-faced and forgot to tell one of his buddies to drive him home or something. Well, causing his mom, who just worries about everything, to call the police, thinking he'd been kidnapped or something. No, he'll be fine. This managed to at least get me to slow down enough to breathe properly again. Still, though, I couldn't stop thinking of the dream from last night. Again, aside from how real it felt, that's the only way I know how to describe it. Real. It's also completely out of left field. And now this, needless to say, my anxiety was well through the roof all day that day. I couldn't sit still, constantly pacing around, wondering what could have happened to him. Not only that, but I was also in a frenzy, wondering what, if anything, was I supposed to do. Felt like I was supposed to be out there searching for him. Finally, I worked up the guts to get up and start driving around, looking all around town for him. Well, the first place I looked, naturally, was the school parking lot. The news said no one saw him leave. I drove into the parking lot, and there it was, Danny's dad's Volkswagen, still parked in the middle of the student lot, purposefully in between two of the parking spaces, something he thought made him look cool. Of course, there were cops there as well, and obviously they weren't keen on the idea of me poking around there either. Being the badass bitch I thought I was back then, I told the officers exactly where they could shove it before attempting to run past them, only to be promptly caught and told to go back to my car and get off the campus or take a ride to the station with them, where they'd have to call Mom and Dad to come and bail me out. So I relented and went back to my car, flustered, making a point to flip them both barrels as I did. I was driving back home when it happened again. Well, this time I knew for a fact I'd not fallen asleep either. This time it was someone else from school, Sarah Keller, the captain of the cheerleading squad. She was hanging outside from the ceiling by her ankles, her hands tied behind her back. Just like Danny before, everything was dark, aside from what looked like a single lamp that illuminated her suspended body. Her mouth was duct-taped too, muffling her screams as I saw the hand from before approach her with a power drill tightly clutched in it, pointing downward. What the hell? I thought, my heart spiraling into yet another frenzy. I watched the power drill then get plunged downward, straight down into, oh God, in between her legs. I just briefly heard her muffled shrieks and saw a shower of blood as her body writhed before I was once again abruptly brought back to the real world. And because of this, I just narrowly avoided gift-wrapping myself around a telephone pole by swerving into the ditch. For a moment, I just sat there, hyperventilating. My entire body locked up, looking like a statue in the driver's seat. My hands were locked so tight around the steering wheel that my knuckles were the color of a piece of paper by the time I'd even noticed. My mind was locked in a three-way tie between wanting to A, throw the car in reverse and start panic searching for Sarah, B, put the car in reverse and book it straight back home and forget about all of this, hoping to God all the while that it really was just me losing it there, or C, curl into a pathetic ball in my car and cry out of sheer hysteria. Well, kind of what I was doing at that moment already. In the end, I'd end up electing option B. Yeah, I wanted to know that my classmates were safe, but at the same time, how did I know they actually weren't? Okay, yeah, Danny's missing, but then again, that didn't necessarily mean he's in danger, right? And the same thing with Sarah. And she hadn't even been reported missing. Well, not yet. And like I said, I went straight home without anything else happening again. Regardless, I was still on the edge the entire time, so much so that I didn't even want to come out of my room the rest of the day. In fact, I couldn't even bring myself to get back up from my bed. My brain eventually became so overclocked with questions of what, how, and why the fuck that I ended up actually falling asleep simply from mental exhaustion. A power reset, essentially. At first, everything was fine, I guess. No vivid nightmares or any weird dreams. Actually, I didn't dream at all. Something that was typical for me. Suddenly, though, out of the frickin' blue again, I saw a new one. This one was of my lab partner in biology class, Francine Simmons. Already, despite being in what I prayed was just some fuck-to-hell nightmare, I could feel my stomach start to turn over on itself. Oh, dear God, no. Please, not again. Not another one. This time, though, I faintly noticed two things to be different. The first was that the location was different. While I couldn't really tell with the other two, I still remembered their killings taking place in a dark room, like maybe a cellar or a basement or something. Not this one, though. Francine's was taking place outside. I still couldn't see where exactly because it was nighttime out, but I knew it was outside because of the trees that I saw surrounding the area of wherever this was apparently taking place, one of which Francine was tied to. And this brings me to the other thing that made this one different from the other two. The way in which it was being done. I'll say right now that this one sticks out to me a bit more than the other times, even now. She was nude, bruises and cuts covering just about every square inch of her body. She was also suspended in the air, similar to how Sarah was, only she appeared suspended off the ground by her wrists and neck, and arranged in a crucifixion pose, her legs dangling freely down. In the killer's hand was a wooden Louisville slugger, and this made my heart stop. No. Francine's eyes were glazed, yet still I could see the cold panic in them, flooding through them and filtering down the rest of her battered body as the killer approached with the bat. I could see tears flood her eyes, but she didn't move. She couldn't move, not even to struggle. About 1.5 feet from her, I saw the bat swing swiftly, sending a crushing blow to Francine's stomach. Francine let out a strained, pitiful wheezing. Through all of this, I was screaming at myself to make this end, to wake the fuck up and make this all be over. But I couldn't. I couldn't wake up. I couldn't make it stop. I couldn't do anything except watch. Francine's body began convulsing, writhing against her restraints. Her eyes went wide with each crash of the bat against her. She began heaving, struggling to gasp for air. This time she was struck across her face, immediately dislocating her jaw. Her lower jaw now hung limply to the right, and I could hear her groan while still wheezing. And that was when I heard a sickening crack, and her head dangled limply. Her body relaxed, hanging freely from the tree limb. She was gone. Well, this wasn't the end, though. Unlike the other two, this one didn't just end with Francine passing. No, this time it was taken a step further when the killer dropped the baseball bat and pulled out a Bowie knife, and then watched as the knife was embedded to the hilt into the middle of Francine's chest and was dragged downwards. At about the navel region, the knife was pulled out and reinserted, sliding across her stomach lengthways and intersecting with the first one to form a giant inverted cross in her body. I saw the hands then dip one finger into the stream of blood that began running down from her navel and draw some sort of mark on her forehead. I didn't get a chance to see what it was, though, before I was brought back to the real world. I was awakened by my mother shaking me awake. "Susan!" she cried. My eyes snapped open and I shut upright in my bed, hyperventilating again. Susan, calm down. Breathe." I couldn't. "Breathe," she repeated. "It's okay, honey. It's okay." I looked at her, gasping frantically. I stuttered. I didn't know what to say, what to do. I felt like my heart was less than 2 seconds from bursting. Every thought and emotion imaginable was sent zipping through my head, actually making me feel a bit dizzy. My eyes began burning with tears, and soon I was huddled in my mother's arms, crying like I was 5 years old again. She just held me. "Shh, it's okay," she said softly. "What happened?" "I don't know," I bawled. She was beaten to death." Her eyebrows raised in confusion. "She?" "Yeah, Francine Simmons. She was hanging from a tree and it—" I was interrupted by a knock from the front door. Mom got up and went to answer the door, leaving me on the bed, quivering. I sat rigid, stiff, cycling through, at least attempting to cycle through, all of the questions worming in and out of my head simultaneously. The first, and I guess the biggest, being, what the fuck was even going on? Who was this person, and why were they doing this? Why was I seeing it? How was I seeing it? Actually, I take back what I said about what's going on being the biggest question. Thinking on it again, I think my biggest question at the time was if what I was seeing was even real, or if I was really just suffering from the worst, most vivid and fucked up nightmares I'd ever had in my entire life. I think even then, a part of me was sitting there on my bed praying to God that really was the case. That none of this was real, and that maybe I just needed a psychiatrist or something, right? Well, of all my burning questions, this was the only one I got an answer for almost immediately. "Susan?" my mother called out from the living room. Slowly I broke from my entropy and shambled from my bed out into the living room. There, standing in the doorway, was Mom and 2 police officers. I froze at the threshold where the hallway meets the living room. My heart was immediately sent into a tailspin. What's going on? Why are the cops here? "Susan, honey," Mum asked, sounding pretty nervous, if not shaken herself. "These 2 gentlemen say they need to speak to you." I didn't move. I just stood, my knees shaking violently. "Miss, we just need to ask you a few questions about where you were last night," one of the officers stated. "But what do you mean? I was here at home." The other officer piped up, sounding like he was eager, a little too much so. "Anybody able to vouch for that?" "No."
My teeth clenched. I looked to Mom, who looked more and more anxious herself by the second, and added, "But I promise I was." The first officer nodded. His face remained concentrated. I wasn't sure whether his silence meant he was actually believing me or if he was just letting me think he did. At any rate, I couldn't just sit there and continue being interrogated anymore and not at least know what the hell for. "But what's going on?" I asked. "Did something happen?"
"When was the last time you saw Daniel Rudd?"
he asked, his eyes narrowing. I could tell he was gauging me. "Last night at the varsity football game."
"Did you see him leave?"
I shook my head in response.
"Did you know of anybody else he may have been with at the game?"
"No, he was alone." His eyebrow raised at me then. Oh, I'd answered wrong, to him anyways.
"Really? No one else at all?"
he asked, now sounding very much accusatory.
"Yeah," I exclaimed. "He wasn't with anyone else last night. At least not that I saw." "Okay, well, what's this about?" Mum chimed in, finally.
"An eyewitness said that they saw your daughter with Daniel around the time of his disappearance."
He then looked at me.
"That little stunt of yours earlier at the schoolhouse makes me believe there's more to the situation than you might be telling us here."
"Like what?" I asked defensively. The hot-head partner chimed in once again.
"Like where you've got him."
He then narrowed his eyes at me.
Let me guess, you dumped his body in the cafeteria at the schoolhouse where we found him, and then when you realized we'd be there, you decided to come in looking all like a big shot so you could draw our eyes off you, right?"
"What?" my mother exclaimed. "What the fuck are you talking about?"
"That's enough,"
ordered the other officer. He tossed his keys to his partner and ordered him to go wait in the car before turning back to us.
"I apologize for that, ma'am. Kid's just out of training. Still hasn't got out of the shoot first, ask questions later phase."
"Okay, apologies accepted, but I think it's time you left," Mum said, noticeably irritated.
I could tell from her clenched teeth that it was everything she could do not to absolutely lose it with this officer. He nodded his head respectfully towards her.
"I understand, ma'am, but I would like to ask you to keep in touch."
He handed Mom a card before then turning to me.
"And you, young lady, might want to be careful. Well, my partner was out of line with the way he spoke to you, but he does have a point. It doesn't look good trying to impede an investigation like that."
Mum said to him, gesturing toward the door. He nodded toward her again and was turning to leave when I stopped him.
"Wait."
He stopped and turned back to me.
"Is it true? You actually found him?"
My breathing became heavy again.
"If so, then that means..."
His face stiffened and he nodded toward Mom and said,
"Okay, keep in touch."
And after that, he finally left. Well, my mouth dropped. Mom came over and wrapped her arms around me.
"Are you okay?"
she asked as tenderly as she could, a hint of aggravation still not having dissipated. I just stared forward, unable to even make eye contact with her.
"Susan?"
I snapped and looked at her.
"Yeah, I don't know."
My head was spinning far too quickly for me to keep up.
"Honey, what were they talking about with you being at the schoolhouse today?"
I sighed and told her the truth. I was trying to look for him after I'd seen on the news that he was missing. Obviously, I didn't mention the whole "I saw him get stabbed to death while in the bathtub" part. Well, not only did I know that she wouldn't believe that, but I still wasn't sure I did either, despite being all but directly told that it was true. She just hugged me close then.
"I'm sorry, honey. It's gonna be okay."
I just stood there stiff in my mother's arms for what felt like hours. I don't really know whether it was because of the shock that I'd just been told that my crush was found murdered, the fact that I'd seen it happening, but couldn't do anything about it, or the fact that, deep down, a part of me knew that it wasn't long before I'd hear the same thing had happened with Sarah and Francine. But my head went completely blank. I remember I stayed like this for a good few days after, too. I basically went through almost the next week and a half, completely blank, mindless, emotionless, and just generally absent from life as a whole, both at home as well as school or anywhere else. Danny's murder was on the front page of the paper the next day, as well as the morning news. School, it was all anybody could talk about. Whispers started going around that it was some random dude stalking the school Friday night who'd managed to snag Danny while no one was around. Of course, the more serious ones started speculating the killer was someone from the school. This led to a handful of witch-hunting groups being formed that went around interrogating anybody that was unlucky enough to come into their crosshairs. By the end of the week, so many damn fights had broken out and kids being jumped, both of which resulted in numerous hospitalizations, that the school was forced to shut down for the next week. Throughout this period of time, outside of one chance encounter with one of the leaders of one of these bands of idiots, Clarence Gorman, who, funnily enough, happened to be Francine's boyfriend, foreshadowing's a bitch, ain't it? I'd managed to pretty much fly completely unnoticed. They didn't get rough with me either. I guess, despite the fact that my crush on him was at the time kind of a well-known thing, they figured I was either way below his league, in other words, not really worth his time talking to, or that I was just generally too timid to be considered a suspect for something like this. Like I said, though, none of that really seemed to matter to me in any real way. Instead, I simply went through every day in a trance. What was worse was that all of what had happened was affecting me even more at night time. It got to a point where, due to not being able to sleep out of fear that I was going to see someone else getting mauled, I was actually beginning to hallucinate. During the next week-long shutdown of the school, Mum took me to see a counsellor after noticing that I'd not slept for, by that time, 5.5 days straight. There wasn't much for it. Hell, what was some shrink going to do? Tell me I was going nuts? Maybe tell me that I was losing it because of the worry over Danny's death, and that was causing me to fantasize that Sarah and Francine were dead too. I figured, if nothing else though, I might be able to get put on some pills or something, and then whatever was causing me to see any of this stuff would stop, right? Well, that's sadly not what happened. Yeah, I told them what had been going on, the shit I'd been seeing, and yeah, I got put on some prescription pills, but no, they didn't do a damn thing. I found this out that Wednesday night when, as I was actually sitting down to eat supper, it started again. Well, this time it started differently, with whoever it was just following behind somebody else. Like the other times, this was yet another abrupt shift from reality. Seriously, 1 minute I'm looking at my bowl of lasagna, and the next I'm going down a dimly lit street, looking at some random stranger's back. This time the unsuspecting victim was someone I didn't recognize offhand. The kid was young, around my age. Other than that, though, I had no idea who this person was or why they were being selected to be killed. Well, of course, it wasn't like I was given any kind of reason as to why the others had been killed either. This went on for about a minute or two, with the killer quietly skulking behind this kid, before the kid was then joined by 3 others in a cul-de-sac. Of the trio that was gathered around, one of them I did recognize. It was Clarence. They had gathered at the cul-de-sac, and Clarence was holding a basketball, about to start dribbling, when he pointed behind the kid to the person who'd been following. I couldn't hear him, but I could see Clarence point and move his mouth, probably asking something along the lines of, "Who the hell are you?" Whatever he said, though, it didn't matter, because in the span of less than 2 seconds, I could see the killer break into a sudden sprint, pouncing and going full throttle on Clarence, grabbing his throat and repeatedly driving the back of his head into the asphalt. While the others tried to force the killer off, only to be shoved or even thrown away. By the time they were finally satisfied, Clarence's face was hardly even recognizable as a person, much less as Clarence Gorman. Just like with Francine, it didn't end there, with Clarence's death. I saw the killer's hand dab its index finger in the blood that began pooling around his head, before then drawing another symbol or something like what had been done with Francine. This time, though, the vision lasted just long enough for me to see what it was that they'd scrawled in the blood, causing my heart to stop cold. It was my initials. There was no mistaking it. It was written in the same pseudo-cursive style I use when signing my initials, having never actually mastered cursive writing, but still wanted to look fancy. Mum had always teased me about it, calling it redneck cursive. Not only that, but they even added the little heart I always drew next to my initials as well. Now, I was horrified. What the fuck? Who is this? How do they know my name? And how can they copy my handwriting perfectly like this? Why are they doing this to these people? People I know. When I came back to reality this time, I began screaming, going into a full psychotic episode. It was so bad that I even began trying to tear my hair from my scalp. Mum actually had to pin me to the floor and restrain me until I eventually calmed down and just began bawling. She asked, frightened and almost at her wit's end like I was, what had happened. I tried as best I could to tell her what I'd experienced, but it was clear she wasn't exactly buying it. I don't think she thought I was just trying to get her attention or anything like that, but I could tell she wasn't taking well with the "I watched another kid from school get killed" story either. I didn't know what to do. I wanted all of this to stop, but how was I supposed to do that? How, if I couldn't tell who it was that was doing this? Obviously, though, the biggest questions were still, why was I having to see this? How was I seeing it from their perspective? That morning we visited the psychiatrist, where he and my mother then spoke in private for the entire half hour, before it was then apparently decided that the best thing for me was to spend some time in an inpatient program. They apparently thought that some time away from everything that was going on in town would help to get rid of the visions by cutting out the excess stress, to quote the shrink. I didn't bother fighting. I knew it wouldn't do fuck all in that regard, but at least there I couldn't hurt myself or continue dragging my mother down with this. By the end of that week, I was moved into the facility. It was one of those that looked like a, albeit well kept and sanitized, group home or sort of halfway house. Along the walls and the hallways were all sorts of cheesy inspirational posters and some different papier-mâché crafts peppered across, going all the way down. Spent the better part of a month there at first. During that time, things were quiet. No visions, no friends and classmates being murdered, and no freakouts. Staff and counsellors there, though, not understanding what I was talking about when I tried to explain to them what had been going on, still super nice and helpful with me. And with things being as quiet as they'd been for the time, I thought everything was finally over. That I really was just overly stressed or whatever, and that I'd be able to go back home and everything would be okay. Then, in that last week, just a few days before I was supposed to be released, I saw the newspaper headlines with the discoveries of both Sarah and Francine's bodies. Both articles listed them as having been dead for weeks, close to 2 months when they were found. That was when, about midday that same day, the police came to the institution to question me. Like before, they seemed keen on the idea that I was the one doing it, even if they weren't quite as direct in their accusations like one had been before. Well, I could still tell, and, could I really blame them? It was my initials on the bodies, signed, sealed, and delivered. But even still, it wasn't me. I wasn't doing anything to anybody. Was I? At any rate, I told them as much, and eventually they let me go. They of course told the supervisor at the institution to keep a close eye on me before leaving, which resulted in them restricting the time I was allowed to spend out of my room. Not that I really left much anyways, but still, it was annoying as hell to have to be followed even more constantly than I already was by not one, but 3 supervisors, just to use the frickin' bathroom.
I guess, aside from the initials and the fact that the victims were people I knew, they had no actual evidence to tie me as the culprit. At the same time, that was little consolation, if any. Sure, I wasn't walking out in handcuffs yet, but that didn't mean I was out of the woods. Oh, not by a long shot. Wherever it was still out there, and I had not even the remotest freaking clue who it was and how or why it was using my name. What's worse, I still wasn't any closer to knowing how I kept seeing these people being butchered. I think that was my biggest source of insomnia fuel. The fact that some sick, unknown freak was out there doing this shit to people I knew, people I cared about, using my identity, and all I could do was sit and watch them do it. Well, I couldn't take it anymore. I couldn't take not being able to sleep. I couldn't take the looming fear that I might get imprisoned for murders I knew for a fact I hadn't committed. And most of all, I couldn't take not knowing if or when, or why for that matter, I was going to see another innocent person get killed. I was done with everything. I planned to do it at supper time that night. Use the cutlery they gave us, even if it was all plastic. Yes, I put the fork and knife through both my eyes, hopefully reaching the brain, and it would all be over. It would end that night there and then, one way or another. I sat down with my meal tray and took a quick glance around. No one was watching. I knew I'd have to be quick though, as that wasn't going to stay the case for long. I clutched the cutlery and brought it up to my face. Right. Just one quick Susan? I snapped up, startled. It was Mom. She'd come with a bag of food from Burger King. Hey, honey, she said in a sad tone, like she was visiting me in the hospital on my deathbed. Yeah, apparently irony's a bitch too. I brought you a Whopper combo, your favorite. I thought I'd join you for supper tonight. I looked at her, tears starting to sting in my eyes. I wanted to be happy. Hell, she was right. She did bring my favorites. BK had been my go-to any time I was asked where I wanted to go for dinner. Not only that, but she was there. I guess it's just natural, even when you're all but grown like I was. Yeah, I still needed my mama. But at the same time, I wanted it to all be over. I needed it to all be over. But I couldn't now, not with her there. So eventually the dam broke and I just devolved into a sobbing mess at the table. Oh, honey, Mom cooed softly, her own voice starting to break. It's gonna be okay. It's gonna be okay. Mama's here. We'll get through this. I just cried pitifully into her arms. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shout. Hell, I had more than half a mind to get up on the table, strip, and start shouting to the world that, no, things weren't going to be okay. That someone was forcing me to watch people get murdered, and that there wasn't a goddamn thing I could do about it. But I knew. What good was that going to do? Well, they hadn't believed it so far, and now I was quietly being investigated by the police. What was the point then in trying to get through this? One way or another, I'm just going to end up behind some set of bars. Mom and I sat there for the remaining 45 minutes in mostly silence. And she tried to engage with me, sure, asking me if I was getting along okay enough here, and if the staff were nice, and if I'd made any friends. She tried, but I couldn't have cared less. I just nibbled at my burger like a mouse, coldly staring out about 1,000 miles past the wall behind her. The time rolled around to leave the mess hall and go back to our rooms for the night. One of the supervisors came to escort me back to the room when my mom left. Walking back to my room, I remember trying to plot another way of trying to end it when it happened. And this time I was immediately thrown into hysterics. For one thing, unlike all the other times where I couldn't tell where it was taking place, this was all too clear to me. It was happening right here, in the institution. It was in the mess hall, focusing on my mother who was headed towards the door into the main hallway. Oh, dear frickin' God. No, Mom!
I remember I was shrieking and howling as this happened. I felt rough hands grabbing my arms, trying to hold me still and lead me to my room. "No," I remember screaming. Let me go. You freaking pigs, goddammit, you have to let me go." I continued to watch as they moved in quickly on my mother, ambushing her. She spun around just in time for me to see the look of shock and panic wash across her face, for her face was cracked against the door behind her. I then watched her unconscious body be dragged across the floor towards the kitchen area. Inside, I saw two of the cooks attempt to rush the killer, only to be thrown aside, with one even having a bread knife get embedded in his shoulder for his trouble. The attention then returned to my mother's body as she was dragged further toward the back, until stopping in front of one of the deep fryers. Mother was slowly stirring awake as the killer began lifting her off the ground. In my frenzy, I managed to send my head back, cracking my supervisor straight in his nose, busting it wide open. This caused him to let go of me, and I took off like a bat straight out of hell to the mess hall. Because I was still seeing through the killer's eyes, it was damn near impossible for me to make it back down the hallway without slamming into the wall like it was a bumper car. Fortunately, I still knew how to make it back down to the mess hall from where I was, as my room was just a few rooms down from the one I slept in. I finally flew through the doors into the mess hall and sprinted in the kitchen, right as Mum's horrified face was plunged into the scalding hot grease. "Let her go!" I screamed. I saw the killer's view peek around the corner to see me, standing at the opening of the kitchen. That's when my own sight returned. With this, though, I felt my head start pounding, like I'd just been cracked over the head with a hammer. Around the corner, I watched a figure. The killer also clutched their forehead like they were in pain too. I looked closer, and my jaw fell. What the No. No, that's not possible. That isn't... But it was. It was me. I was looking at myself. I was looking through myself. Why, who are you? He said, sounding exactly like me. You, Susie. I'm you. I began touching my face. This thing, this other me, had paper white skin and no eyes, instead having two red X shapes over the skin where her eyes should have been. What are you talking about? I asked, now just as much confused, actually just as lost as I was panicked. She just tilted her head to the side, pointing to her left temple. I'm you. I've always been you. I'm the little birdie in your head that screamed to be let out. I'm the one that's always pushing you to do what needs to be done. What do you mean? Do what? To who? She then pulled my mother's body from the grease. She wasn't moving. Other me threw her to the ground in front of me. Her face was now peeling away all over like it was paper, revealing layers of meaty sinew underneath. My stomach turned over, bile rising up to my throat. That's what should happen to all of them. They don't believe you, they never will. They don't believe what we're capable of, what you're capable of. They just look at you and say, she can't do anything about it. They scoff and say that you're too innocent. She looked down at Mum's body and grinned, revealing teeth that were exactly like mine, including the braces I had back then. Well, how's this for too innocent, huh? I retched and looked into her eyes. You're a freak, I shouted. I'm a freak, she retorted sarcastically. I'm just you, Susan. I'm just a part of you. A part of you that you've kept buried, thinking you could keep me like that forever so you could keep being a soft little bitch. Everyone has one. It's a part of everyone from the time they were born. There's always been a me inside of them. You killed my friends. For what? Because you could? Her grin fell then.
Friends? You really don't know, do you? You actually thought those cunts were your friends. You thought they cared about you. Wait, what do you... Think about every time you've been hanging around with them, or tried to. Think about every time you turned your back on any one of them and listened because they thought you couldn't hear them.
I paused at this, and my breathing slowed.
Look at her, they say, laughing. You sure we have to invite her? Oh, we should find a new table away from her, you know.
I began concentrating. I didn't want to, but something was gnawing at me now. A sort of knee-jerk reaction almost, spurred on by what other me was suggesting. And because of this, things I honestly didn't think I'd noticed before started being made clear to me. I started thinking about the looks I'd get in the hallway at school. The look at Miss Good Girl look. The look that said they barely tolerated me. I started hearing the whispers coming from seemingly nowhere, yet at the same time I knew it came from them, my peers, my friends. I could hear them talking about how they wished that girl would go away, how they were just fine until that girl showed up and made everything boring. It was always a subconscious thing for me before, thinking I was being paranoid, you know.
That they weren't talking about me, right?
Right.
Well, they were. They were talking about me. I'm that girl. Hey, get the picture now.
Her voice brought me crashing back.
They weren't your friends. They tolerated you so they wouldn't have to be the bad guys. They put up with you being around them so they could keep lying to you, the rest of the world, and even themselves, the same way you're trying to do now, by saying that you're a better person. Let me be the first to be honest with you, the way I have been all your fucking life while you've tried to ignore me. No one is truly a better person. No one truly gives a damn whether you're alive or dead. Or they might shed a few tears, actual tears, over you when something happens, sure, whatever, but it won't last. And those are just the better ones you keep wanting to run your mouth about. The majority.
She waved her hand around the room.
We'll just keep walking, not remembering or having a single care in the world that you're not around.
I was speechless. My body was a statue, with my mouth dropped wide open. I had no way to retort.
I mean, hell, she went on. Remind me of what you were going to do before Mommy Dearest here came in.
I looked down at her, tears burning in my eyes once more. I was... A lump formed in my throat.
I was going to end it. And why was that? Why were you so ready to go if people actually cared like you say they do, huh?
I kept looking at Mom now.
Crickets. Oh, I hear nothing but crickets. And you want to know? No, you're wrong, I said, interrupting her. You're wrong. She was there. She wanted to be there. She was trying to make me happy. She just wanted to cheer me up because of what you've been doing.
Her face fell further.
Her appearance of control was gone now. Yeah, but what about them? I spat. I could feel determination welling up inside me now. So they were fake. So they only put up with me to make themselves look better. So what? That's them.
I looked once more to my mother.
She always had my back, even if no one else did. And you just murdered her. You. I'm not like you, not at all. I don't care if you are from my subconscious or whatever. I stand with what I said. I am nothing like you.
For a moment she just stood there, noticeably trembling. Her neck twitched more and more violently. My own body tensed up. I was ready for her to, at any second, leap at me to attack. Suddenly, however, she stopped, relaxing her body, and just smiled before vanishing into thin air. I started to look around for her before then dropping down to feebly try to check my mother for any kind of life. Nothing. No breath, no pulse, nothing. She was gone. I burrowed my face into her chest, and I just began sobbing. I'd failed. Mom, my own personal cheerleader, my one true friend, was gone. She'd saved my life, only to have to pay with hers. No, worse. She'd saved my life just for hers to be taken by me. Even if it wasn't actually me, it was still my face she would see before being forced into the oil. Not only that, but whether I liked it or not, deep down, far deep below even the darkest parts of my mind and my heart, I knew other me was right. She has, and always had been, a part of me, something I kept buried for so long that eventually it forced its way up and out, even finding a way of taking a mind and form of its own face, one that showed how ugly both it and I was at the same time. And soon I was being hoisted off of my mother by staff and police who'd been called by one of the cooks who'd managed to limp away and call 911. That night I was arrested for the murders of both my mother and the cook who got the bread knife lodged in him. The trial went on for almost a month and a half. During this time they even tried bringing the previous murders into question, only for them to be deemed ultimately inadmissible in my trial, due to lack of evidence that I was the culprit. To this day, their cases still officially remain unsolved. Regardless, I still got what, I guess you could say, was coming to me. Thanks to the attorney my mother always had for me and her in case of any legal matters, notably when I was younger with the custody battles with my father, I was able to plead insanity and have my sentence reduced from 30 years in prison to 25 in a mental institution. That said, it wasn't any sort of cakewalk from there. The new facility was nothing like the one I was at before. Instead of the brighter, more welcoming environment I'd been in, everything now looked a lot more dull and lifeless. The staff were also a lot less friendly and inviting than what I'd been used to before. They weren't outright mean or abusive or anything, but they always just looked blankly at me, like they barely noticed I was even there. Almost like they didn't care. It's been almost 6 years now since this all happened, and I've been here, in this place ever since. Because I'm considered too dangerous to myself and others, I'm not allowed outside except to be escorted by 2 armed security guards to the cafeteria and to the restroom. I'm also not allowed cutlery, nor am I allowed pencil and paper. However, after good behavior and the shrink's orders, I was allowed to type this out here. They feel that reaching out might make it easier to reintegrate back into the world, or something like that, without having to actually be near somebody. I doubt that, though. I honestly doubt I'll ever be able to be out there again like I was. You see, I'm scared now. It's because of an ingrained feeling that other me was even able to exist in the first place. Just like she'd said, she was a part of me. And everyone has one just like her. A part that they try to keep buried and forget about. A part that you may not even realize is there, until it eventually crawls its way up and forces itself out of you, taking on a form and identity you've never seen before, and yet at the same time is only a reflection of you. I'm afraid, because of what I may find lurking inside me. I'm afraid of looking through its eyes again and seeing what I truly am on the inside. I was stalked and kidnapped by a serial killer. He showed me that there's something even scarier that's watching all of us. My corpse child. What I'm about to say here is hard for me for a couple of reasons. First, obviously, because of how traumatic it was, but secondly, because of how bizarre it was too. I saw things I'm still not sure, or you or anyone for that matter, can really explain. It started, for me anyways, with the eyes. The large red eyes with a pair of wings coming out of them, this time painted on the bricks of the next-door apartment complex in the alleyway. I'd seen this before on the news. Another body. Who was it this time? Another woman? A child? The eyes saw them first. They saw nothing, they never do. I still remember that night too, almost shot for shot. I'd gotten home from working late at the convenience store, having had to stay for another 3 hours after closing just to put the frickin' place back together after being so badly trashed. It was 3 a.m. when I finally got to leave, and I was tired. Nothing human up at that hour. Got home about 15 minutes later and shambled, exhausted, out of my car and into my apartment. I remember how cold it was, though I was too tired to notice, as well as how quiet it was. Dead silent. Upon entering my apartment, I locked the door, all 7 deadbolts, something I found to be necessary a year before, when I had 2 break-ins over the course of a month, and just launched myself onto the couch. Didn't even bother trying to get out of my sweaty-ass clothes, or even making it to bed. At least I have tomorrow off. It was the last thing to cross my mind before blacking out cold as soon as my head touched the couch cushion. I didn't hear anything. I was awakened maybe 15 minutes later to the sound of sirens from outside. Red and blue lights flashed rapidly from the window. I bolted up on the couch, still groggy. What is that? Police? What's going on? What happened? Stumbled over to the window. From my window on the 4th floor, I couldn't see much with the lights flashing in my still half-asleep eyes. I do, however, remember seeing the pair of large red eyes graffitied on the wall, staring forward. You can't see them, but they see you. Oh, God, I thought, chills starting their course up my spine. It was him again, Azazel, or Charlotte's fallen angel killer, as the media had nicknamed him. This had been his trademark for almost 3 months. Find someone walking by in the dead of night, snatch them into the alley, kill them quickly and quietly, causing no one to hear anything, and marking the wall in their blood before basically vanishing into thin air. God, how long ago this happened? I wondered. I couldn't hear him. What if he's still nearby? No one ever hears him. No one sees him. Well, it goes without saying that this snapped me wide awake and kept me that way until the sun came up. I grabbed the 9mm my late husband got me 2 years before he died, and I poised myself on the couch, ready to blast anyone that might try to come in. I took every ounce of self-control I had to keep from unloading the magazine when I heard the knock at the door about 2 or so hours in. Mrs. Hoffman? The man's voice called from the other side of the door. It's the police. For a moment I stayed stiff on the couch, locked in a frightened entropy, the barrel of the gun trained at the door. My hands shook. Oh, it's just the police. Another set of knocks came from the other side. Mrs. Hoffman? I slowly began to get up from the couch and crept to the door. I unlocked 6 of the deadbolts, leaving the top one latched, before cracking the door open. Outside were 2 officers. Mrs. Hoffman? The one on the left asked. I cleared my throat. Yes? We're from the Mecklenburg County Police Department. I'm Officer Wade, and this is my partner, Officer Vega. If you wouldn't mind, we'd like to ask you a few questions. May we come in? I unlatched the last bolt and opened the door fully. Yeah, come in. They came in. I went into the kitchen and started brewing a pot of coffee. Would either of you like some coffee? No, thank you, ma'am, Officer Wade replied. We'll try to keep this brief. We just want to know if you might have seen anything out of the ordinary. I replied that I hadn't. Anything at all? Maybe someone you hadn't seen in the neighborhood before, someone shady? No, I replied. At least not any more than usual. What do you mean? Officer Vega asked. I answered with a tired scoff. I mean, you've seen this neighborhood, right? Not exactly squeaky clean. He looked to his partner, who nodded at him, and then back to me. I didn't see anybody in the alley, if that's what you're asking. And you didn't hear anything? Officer Wade asked. No, not until I heard the sirens just a couple of hours ago. He nodded at this, and I turned to continue making coffee. Officer Wade handed me his card and told me to call if I saw anything before he and Officer Vega began for the door. Oh, wait. They stopped, grabbing the doorknob. How long ago? What?
The alley. How long ago did it happen?
Officer Wade nodded for his partner to go towards the door. He left, and it was me and Officer Wade. About 3:30 this morning, ma'am. Can't be certain, but I was told that by the best estimate.
My blood chilled. My heart dropped from my chest like a rock. 3:30. I was asleep.
I asked if they knew who the victim was then. He replied they didn't yet, though, of course, I kind of doubt he would have shared that with me if he did know. He was about to turn and leave again when I asked him one last question, one that deep down I knew he wouldn't answer.
Is it him? The fallen angel?
Oh, we're not sure yet, Mom, was all he said before turning and leaving. I was alone again. For a moment, I just stood there trying, and kind of failing, to take in and process what I'd just heard. My mind was a chaotic hornet's nest. An innocent person just got murdered right next to me, and I'd slept through it. Aside from the palpable sense of guilt that it brought me, it also filled me with panic. It brought a far more haunting suggestion to mind. Would I have noticed anything if I was awake?
Was it possible to catch a ghost?
He said the time of death was 3:30 a.m. That was only about 15 minutes after I got home. I didn't see anything or anybody.
You can't see them, but they see you.
Oh, how long had he been in there? Ding! My thoughts abruptly ended when I heard the pot signal that the coffee was done. My hands were shaking as I lifted the pot and began pouring. I ended up only filling the mug about halfway before losing the rest of it to the drain. I, still trembling, raised the mug to my lips and started sipping it, swallowing hard.
Would I have seen or heard him if I'd been awake?
This thought swam around in my head as the sun rose. By then, of course, the commotion in the alleyway had long died out. It was empty again, quiet. I was exhausted, of course, which made me really slow to get moving again. Didn't have to work, sure, but I couldn't just sit around in the house all day either. For one thing, I'm not one to stay cooped up all day. I'll sleep in occasionally, sure. I had to get out of the house sometime. The other thing, though, was that I had a date planned to go see the Batman with Paul at 1 that afternoon, having lunch together afterwards back at my place. Well, if nothing else, it'll give me something to think about, right? I looked at the clock after getting dressed. 11:30. I still had just enough time to do a quick grocery run to grab stuff for lunch. Well, granted, it meant foregoing the shower I kind of really needed. Oh well. I threw on a blue tank top and the first pair of jeans I could find that I was at least mostly sure were clean before heading out. When I walked down to the parking lot to my car, I couldn't help but glance back over to the alley. The eyes were still there, faded a bit, but still thick and red, still watching me.
I didn't see anything last night.
Nothing was wrong, yet I felt like something was going to be soon. For a moment, I flashed back to last night. I thought of how quiet it was.
Nothing was happening. I couldn't see anything.
I imagined the victim, their face as they were being attacked, their frightened eyes.
They didn't see him coming. There's nothing wrong, Angie. Come on, get a grip. He couldn't have gotten far. Might still be near, in the area.
I closed my eyes at this and shook my head.
It could be anywhere. Ghosts can come from anywhere. God, there's no one here. He's gone now. I won't see him coming. Everything's just fine.
I took a deep breath and got in the car. It took a minute, but I finally, with the help of a radio comedy show, don't ask me who it was, it actually made me laugh, so who gives a rat's ass, I managed to calm my nerves again. Despite this, I did still find myself constantly darting my eyes around as I drove along. This continued when I got to the parking lot at Publix, constantly looking over my shoulder. Well, this too finally died down when I got inside. I started getting items to make lasagna for lunch. I'd gotten just about everything, like pasta, mozzarella, tomato sauce, and even garlic knots. Those were always better than Texas toast, and I was in line to check out when it hit me that I was forgetting something. Oh, beef. I'm forgetting the ground beef. I quickly swung my cart around and started to run back to the deli. I looked at the time. 12:15. Jeez, gotta hurry. In my little frenzy, I lost track of my surroundings and ended up running straight into a man coming towards me out of the frozen meat section, knocking him to the ground. "Oh, God, sir, are you okay?" I exclaimed, rushing over to help him up. He didn't respond. I took his hand and helped him to his feet. "I'm so sorry about that." I chuckled awkwardly and said, "Oh, I got so caught up I didn't see you there." This time he turned his head to me and parted the right corner of his mouth, chuckling dryly. I couldn't really see much of his face. It was mostly covered by the hoodie he was wearing. He also appeared to be wearing shades. Maybe he's blind. Maybe he didn't see me either.
Oh, no one usually does. They do,
he said in a voice that sounded like it was coming from a yogi. It was smooth yet soft. It didn't really seem to match the broad-shouldered 5'7" man in front of me, who looked to be at least in his mid-40s.
People don't see me, but they see them.
He pointed upwards to the ceiling. "What, excuse me?" I asked, confused. "What did you say?" He just smiled before turning and walking off. I stood, confused for a moment. What was his deal? I wondered. People don't see him, but they see them? What the hell was that supposed to mean? Who are they?
The eyes see them first. They see nothing.
I probably would have spent at least another hour or two digging around the rabbit hole with this if I hadn't glimpsed my watch out of the corner of my eye, now reading 12:45. Oh, shit, I gotta get moving. With that, I zipped in, grabbed the beef, and raced back to the checkout. I was heading back to my car when I looked back again and saw the guy I'd knocked over standing in the parking lot about 2 lots away from me, staring at me. I couldn't see his face, with his hood still covering it, despite it, being 90 freaking degrees out. Still, I could tell he was staring dead at me. What the hell? Is he looking at me? Why? What does he want? For a moment, we just stood there, locked in a staring contest, neither of us knowing who should break first. Finally, a car passed between us, and when it went past, he was gone. Vanished. In thin air. Like a ghost. Like a shadow, like he was never there. What the hell? Where'd he go? Started throwing my head in every direction. He was just there, wasn't he? Where is he? I didn't see him. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. It's nothing, Angie. Just get in the car. I took one last look around, one last sweep of the area. Well, whoever that was, he's gone now.
Ghosts can walk through walls. They come from everywhere.
Just get in the car, Angie.
I can't see him. No one can. Get in the car. I can't see him coming.
I opened the door and was about to get in the car when I heard it. I was turning to the left where it was coming from. Huh? What the? I was silenced when I felt a firm hand cover my mouth. In the hand was a white cloth, being forced against my face. I started struggling, clawing behind me at the attacker's face. When I couldn't seem to reach that, I began trying to ram my elbows into his stomach and kick him in his crotch. Neither of these were doing me any good.
Look, you have to come with me,
I heard him say. It was the same smooth, almost warm, soothing voice I'd heard in the store.
They see you. I have to take you with me now.
I started feeling woozy. My arms and legs started feeling weak. Everything was going blurry. Darkness was creeping into my vision quickly, and in a panic I managed to wrestle my chin up enough to open my mouth and bite down hard. Sure enough, this caused the hand to retract, and I was free again. I gasped desperately for air. I was still dizzy. I tried to look up to see who it was. Nothing. No one was there. It was just me in an otherwise empty parking lot. What the fuck? I swung around in every direction. Nothing. Just cars. He was gone. Who the hell was that? Where'd they go? I frantically threw myself into my car and locked all the doors before rifling through my purse for my phone to call the police. I couldn't find it. I turned out my pockets. It wasn't there either. God, where's my phone? I opened the door again and started looking on the ground for it, thinking it might have slipped out during the struggle. Nope, it wasn't there. I started trying to look through my purse again, only to find that my phone wasn't the only thing missing. My keys were gone too. Oh God, he must have taken them. I then got out and ran back to the store. Fortunately, I wasn't parked far from the entrance, meaning I wouldn't have far to run. Less of a chance of being ambushed again, as long as I kept moving. After running in, I found the nearest cashier and asked, breathless, if I could borrow the store phone to call the police. I told him I'd just been attacked in the parking lot, and my phone and keys had been stolen. He led me to the back room where the phone was, and I pulled out the card Officer Wade had given me and dialed the number. Part 2.
Mecklenburg County Police. What is the nature of your emergency?
I was just attacked in the parking lot.
Okay, ma'am. Can you tell me your name and location?
My name is Angela Upham. I'm at the Publix just off of Spada Street.
Okay, and you said you were assaulted in the parking lot?
Yeah, he grabbed me from behind and tried to put me to sleep. I managed to get free, and when I looked again, he was gone.
You said he attempted to incapacitate you?
Yeah, he had a cloth that he held up to my face. I felt dizzy. I still do. I think he might have drugged me.
Okay, now, Miss Upham, can you describe your attacker?
No, I didn't get a good look at him. Like I said, he got me from behind. I could only see his hand.
Nothing at all? Tattoos, scars, anything?
No. I then thought about the struggle again. I saw his hand. I'd bitten his hand. Yeah, I'd bit him. There'd be a mark. It wasn't much of a lead, but still, it was something. There's a bite mark on his hand. How do you see a ghost? Force it into the light. Oh yeah, his hand, right hand has a bite mark on it. He was white and thin, from what I could tell with how bony his hand was.
Okay, now, Angela, I want you to stay where you are. A unit is being dispatched to your location now. ETA 5 minutes. Do not, under any circumstances, leave the store until authorities arrive.
I agreed, and the call was disconnected. After that, I just sat there, my thoughts crumbling and forming an avalanche. Who was that? Where did he come from? No one sees him. Only they see us. What did he want? If it was a robbery, then why was only my phone and keys missing? Where the fuck is he now? I wasn't able to see him. I think that was the question that got under my skin the most. If I didn't see him, I didn't see where he went, then he could be anywhere. He could be anybody. I stayed in the room until I was called out by the arriving police. Outside, at the front of the store, were Officers Wade and Vega.
Angela Upham?
Officer Wade asked. Yeah, I replied.
You okay, ma'am?
I nodded my head weakly.
So, what happened?
I was heading out to my car when, out of nowhere, some guy comes up from behind me and puts a cloth over my mouth. Can you show me where it happened? I led him to the doors and pointed to my car. He sent Officer Vega to go look at it. You said you got away by biting him. Yeah, he let go when I did that. When I looked up, there was no one there. I looked everywhere. He was gone. Was he there? I was about to drive off when I realized I didn't have my keys or my phone anymore. You know of anyone who'd want to intentionally hurt you? I shook my head. At that time, Officer Vega came back in and said there was no sign of anyone there, or having been there. Officer Wade turned back to me and asked,
"You said you didn't see where he went?"
"No," I exclaimed, anxious. "Like I told you, one minute he had me, I bit him, he let go, and then he vanished." The two exchanged glances at each other before stepping outside. I watched them walk to the car, looking like they were examining the area again. They came back about 5 minutes later. "All right, Miss Upham," Officer Wade said. "Looks like everything's all clear. There's no one out there now. I'm going to have Officer Vega here give you a ride home while we continue searching the area here." Officer Vega led me out to the car. Even with his company, I still couldn't help but glance around cautiously in the parking lot. It was when I caught sight of my car that my eyes bugged out. There, scratched into the driver's side door, were the eyes. I froze. They stared back at me, staring into me, through me even. I imagined that somehow he, my attacker, no, the fallen angel killer, was staring back at me through those eyes. "Ma'am, is everything all right?" Officer Vega asked, having now taken notice of my terrified state. Still shaken beyond being able to form a coherent thought, I pointed to my car. He looked over and immediately became as surprised as I was. "What the hell?" That wasn't there a minute ago, was it?" I asked, hoping deep down that he'd answer yes, it was. But it had been there when he was out looking for the assailant. How could he have done this without him seeing it before? He shook his head. "Here," he said, urging me forward while still looking alarmed at my car. "Let's go to the car." He led me the rest of the way, and I got inside. He told me to wait a moment inside while he radioed his partner about the car. I just nodded blankly. My head was spinning so much, so fast, I'm honestly a little surprised it didn't spin right off my neck and take off like a helicopter. How was any of this happening? Why was any of this happening? How in the hell was someone, a normal man, well, I use normal only in a lightly general sense here, able to do shit like this? How in the span of maybe a minute, if that, was able to deface my car like that and not be noticed? He's not a man. I could see a man. I couldn't see him. Moreover, how was he able to attack me like that and disappear? I can't see him. I thought back to before the attack, seeing the man in the hoodie standing there watching me. What was he staring at? How the hell was he gone so quick? What did he want with me? He's not a man. He's something else. What was he going to do to me if I hadn't gotten away? People don't see me, but they see them. Ghosts can come from anywhere. What the hell does he mean? I faintly heard the sound of the car door slamming shut. I finally broke from my spiraling fit when I heard the engine turn over. Anywhere. They could be anywhere. My heart started racing again when the car peeled out of the parking spot and took off at breakneck speed. Whoa, slow down. What the hell are you... My breath caught in my throat when I turned and looked next to me. It wasn't Officer Vega in the driver's seat. It was him. My heart stopped. My mouth hung open. I wanted to scream, but for whatever reason I couldn't. Oh, Jesus, he's right here, right beside me. Where did he come from? He appeared from thin air. What happened to Officer Vega? What did he do to him? What's he going to do to me? He stared straight ahead, almost hypnotized to the road as it stretched on. I darted my eyes over to the passenger door. It was unlocked. Slowly, just ever so slightly, I moved my hand to grab the handle. I have to jump. It's my only way. Don't do it. His voice was still as mellow and smooth as before. I looked back to him. His focus was still deadlocked on the road. I have to get away.
and you'll want to come with me."
What? I asked, still shaking. He didn't reply. He kept racing down the highway at a horrifying speed. I looked again at the door handle before grabbing it and throwing the door open, ready to hurl myself out. Before I could, however, I was grabbed by the back of my shirt and jerked back into the car. This caused the back of my head to smack against the doorframe, knocking me dizzy. He shut the door again before returning his gaze to the road. My vision had exploded into a mess of cloud and fuzz. My head throbbed and I could feel the beginning of a horrible migraine. I heard the door locks click. He'd locked me in now. I couldn't try escaping again. I was trapped.
"He's trying to get away."
"Please," he said calmly.
"Don't panic. I won't hurt you."
I barely registered his words. Everything was still fuzzy, both visually and auditorily.
"I never hurt anyone."
"You're him," I groaned, aching. You're him, the fallen angel." His eyes were still focused ahead. "What do you want with me?"
"He was running from something."
He was silent for another moment before replying.
"I don't want anything from you. I want to help you."
"What?"
"You won't understand, but I'm here to help you."
"What are you talking about? How are you helping me? Where are you taking me?"
"He's trying to get away from something." "Oh, you don't see them yet, but they see you. They've always seen you. They see everyone. They see the others and take them."
I was floored. What? What the fuck are you talking about?"
"The eyes." "Please calm down. Just keep looking forward and soon you'll begin to see them too."
"See what?" I exclaimed.
"No one can see them, but they see us." "Them," he said, pointing all around. "They see us. They control us, and they take anyone who has the ability to see them, to see the truth." "He's afraid of them. He can see them."
"What do you mean? Who are they?"
"Oh, they're not a who. They're everything and nothing. They are power, and they crave control. They watch us and force us to live by their will. And we can't know because we can't see." The road kept going.
I was lost, hilariously lost. None of what I heard made any sort of connection to me. It didn't sound at all logical. It sounded like something a wingnut, tinfoil hat wearing crackpot would say.
How long did that road last?
Who was watching us? Was he talking about the government or something? Was that who we to get away from?
Quiet, empty, endless road. Why couldn't anyone see them? Was it a real road? Was there anything or anybody else?
I looked forward. The road stretched on as we continued speeding along.
Just keep looking. You'll see it, the truth.
I did. At first I was still confused. What was so important for me to apparently see?
The road hadn't changed.
I then, however, noticed something about it. Just a subtle thing at first, and I almost missed it. Then, however, I realized that we were passing the Publix again.
We never left.
What? Did we just drive in a circle?
The road doesn't change, just the way we see it.
Well, that wasn't all. I could see everything that had been around it again as well. The same road signs, the other markets, even the houses that had been in the area. Everything.
Oh, you see it now, don't you?
He asked, his voice for the first time sounding actually worried, like he was afraid that I did. I began to wonder why. Why, despite the fact that we should have been miles away by now, were we passing the same places? Why was I locked in the car with this psycho, a known serial killer? More than this, though, why was he so afraid? How does he know any of this? Why does he want me to know? All of this had my head buzzing so badly that I almost didn't see other changes to the environment outside. I first caught it out of the corner of my eye. I noticed that everything began to subtly change colour, by which I mean it began to lose colour. It was a progression, but I soon began to see the grass go from a bright, lush, healthy green to a stark albino white, devoid of any definition or health. The same became true for everything else. It was like someone was slowly trying to erase the world outside, leaving only the blank, featureless outlines of the things that had been there. By this point I was beyond the ability or capacity to ask what the fuck was going on. I could only stare out front through the windshield, horrified. I did manage to choke out one question. Where am I? This, he said, his voice, while still smooth, noticeably becoming deeper, is the world, the real world, you might call it. What? His voice got lower, deeper. Most won't see the world like this. Only those of us who see the truth, those that see them. See who? I cried desperately. I began to feel something warm coming from his direction. It grew hotter and hotter, intensifying, until I looked over to him and, ironically, felt my blood chill. He was now glowing. Around his body was a bright golden aura that glowed brighter and brighter. My eyes went wide seeing this, wider than they'd ever been. What the fuck? What is this? How is he glowing? What the fuck is he? An angel, a guide, a holy light to an unknown power. I didn't voice any of this, and not even because I didn't want to, but rather I just couldn't. Even still, I must have still conveyed my feelings of utter shock, utter terror at what I was seeing. Seeing is believing, and knowledge is frightening. Don't be afraid, he said in a voice that now boomed so much that it shook throughout my body, echoing like the inside of a drum. Your fear will draw them towards us. What are you talking about, goddammit? I was at my wit's end. No, I was beyond my wit's end. I was so far past that if I did wake up from whatever little pipe dream this was, I'd have to be institutionalized on the spot. Look, enough of this cryptic horseshit. Either tell me what's going on, or let me out of here, now. Quiet, he thundered. He now no longer looked the same. He no longer even looked like a person. Now his body was just a golden, glowing outline of a man with long, thin wisps coiling from different areas of his form. This once again made me go speechless. Just relax, please. I know this is hard for you. That's why I brought you here. You're afraid, I know, but I'm here to save you from that. I don't... Just keep looking and see the truth. What truth? That the world you know was never real. That what you know is only what you've been allowed to see. This, child, is always what the real world has been. Their blank slate, their sandbox, their playground. For the love of God, who are they? You keep mentioning these things, but what are they? Where are they? Why can't I see them? I couldn't see them because I couldn't see ghosts. I didn't believe in ghosts. Oh no, I heard him murmur, still an impossibly deep, angelic, for the lack of any better word, voice. They've found us. Part 3. Overhead, from the blank, featureless sky above, I watched as a large black crack split across, like the splitting of ice. From this rift, a blinding light bled down as the sky split apart. My heart stopped dead in my chest when I watched a horde of eyeballs that were clustered together to form one giant, writhing, disgusting, and just straight horrifying mass descend. Each and every one of the thing's thousands of irises were different colors, some of which were mixes of colors I didn't even know were possible. Each pupil twitched in every direction simultaneously, apparently searching desperately for something. Not something. Someone. I felt the car pick up speed, and the massive eyes began vibrating at a supersonic level, glowing intensely as it did so. What is that? Them. The ones I've been telling you about.
The ones that see everything in your world.
What does it want?
Control. They seek only control over you and everything it created on this earth.
What do you mean, everything it created?
I told you before, your world's a sandbox. It, is the one that builds on it. And believe me, they are very much a jealous people when it comes to power, to control. That's why you and the others can't see them, but they can always see you. I looked in front of me again, to the thing. It was now vibrating somehow even more violently and starting to glow an aura of deep burning crimson. It was angry.
What's it doing?
I asked, petrified. It's searching. It knows another of its toys is trying to be taken from it, so it's trying to find us. When it does, it'll unmake the both of us, wiping us out, just like they did with the others.
Others? What do you mean, who?
To this, I heard him sigh. For the first time, he actually sounded mournful, sad even. Like he was regretting something, confessing some secret or deed he tried to keep hidden away, buried deep down. I'm not a monster like you think I am. I've seen what you call me, what you see me as, but I'm not a killer. I never hurt anyone, at least not intentionally. I caught my eyebrow.
What do you mean?
He sighed again. My eyes were open to all of this, to the truth, a long time ago. Because of this, I wanted to spread the truth to others whose eyes haven't been able to see. I wanted others to break free of them and their control. But every time I did, it always saw and always found them and took them, wiping them out.
You mean the victims?
Weren't mine. I was stunned again. I couldn't think straight. With the world essentially ending right in front of me at the whim of whatever the hell this abomination was, and now the revelation that this guy, this psychotic freak, wasn't a monster after all. I was almost completely at a loss for words. Finally, I found the will to voice one more question, the only one that mattered to me in that moment.
What are we going to do? How do we stop it?
Like I said, your fear is attracting them. It's what's keeping your eyes closed. What's keeping you under their influence, their control. You have to stop being afraid. Purge yourself of your fear.
How?
I asked, not at all understanding how this was even possible. How was I supposed to not be afraid? How, witnessing all of this, these things that were the kind of stuff people only saw either during their worst nightmares or their worst drug trips, was I supposed to stop being afraid? I've never before opened my eyes. What if I can't get rid of it? What would happen to me if it got me? Would I be wiped out too, like the victims? What if it doesn't work? How am I supposed to get rid of fear? My eyes aren't open yet. My spiraling train of thought came to a screeching halt when one of the terrifying entity's gleaming red tendrils shot through the windshield, seizing and tightening around the man's wrist. I could hear a sizzling noise, followed by the smell of sulfur, and the man letting out a sharp cry of pain in a tone that didn't sound entirely human. At least, not just one, almost like multiple people screaming at the same time from the same throat. Well, instincts kicked in, and I reached out to try and pull it off of him, only to immediately retract in pain before I could even touch it, feeling like my hands were on fire. The tendril coiled up across his arm, leading up around his neck. It then began pulling him forward, trying to yank him through the windshield. His seatbelt was the only thing keeping him inside. Eventually I saw the straps being torn at the seams from pressure. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what I could do. My eyes. Oh, you have to let go, he bellowed, groaning in pain. The belt straps were only barely holding together now. The tendril was worming itself into his mouth and down his throat. I looked out again at the thing, the monster. Its pulsing eyeball mass glowed brighter and brighter. I could feel the heat searing and unforgiving. I could feel anger from it, raw, unfiltered malice. I could feel its hatred. Brighter and brighter, the gleaming tendril burned, scorching the man until he erupted into flames himself. In seconds, less than seconds, he was engulfed in a burning ball of crimson fire.
I'll never forget how his screams sounded as he burned, like 1,000 people were screaming at the same time as they were cooked alive. He strained to scream one last thing to me before he was gone, seared away.
Let it all go.
I was alone now. I had no weapon, no power, no idea what to do. The thing loomed over the car, sending its sights on me now. This was it. I was done for.
I have to open my eyes. Adhoc tenetur.
I heard the thing bellow in a voice somehow even more impossibly deep than even the man was a minute ago. It was almost equivalent to the sounds of an earthquake rumbling.
Perfidi habit, sed adhoc timet, adhoc tenetur.
I closed my eyes, bracing for the end.
My eyes!
I thought of home, my apartment. I thought of Paul, our dates. I thought of the two of us together at the theatres, watching the movie together, laughing, jumping at the thrilling scenes, cutting up.
Open my eyes.
All the times I'd been scared in the past, like when I was a little girl and was caught in the deep end of a pool or lake. Every time my head would go under, I'd close my eyes, afraid of what I'd see if I opened them, imagining some vicious beast ready to tear me apart. Or I'd see nothing at all ever again.
Open them.
I remembered how when I did open them again, I'd always see the sunlight, and I'd be okay.
Now, open them now.
I'd managed to struggle my way to the surface. I'd made it out, where I'd see my dad there, telling me that everything was okay, that he had me now, that I was safe.
Open my fucking eyes.
I felt something inside me shifting, a sense of determination, a dormant instinct, defiance. Yes, I wanted to survive, I wanted to be free, to live, but more than this, I wanted to beat this fucking thing right here, right now. I opened my eyes again. The entity still towered above the car, vibrating, glowing, pulsing. I felt my own body begin to feel warm. Quickly I began to feel hotter and hotter. It wasn't painful, though. It was invigorating. I was doing it. I was letting go. I wasn't afraid of it or whatever it could do to me. The entity's mass began frantically pulsing again, its bright red aura returning with more vengeance than before. I knew it was getting desperate. And it knew.
Vilicum rupiet,
the thing roared. I could see its eyes, each and every one of them. Now it was afraid. Staring dead at it, I felt triumph wash over me, and I said, in a voice that echoed like how the man's voice did,
Now I see you. I see you, and you have no power over me.
To this, the thing roared in anger as its aura glowed brighter and hotter with rage.
Ego dissolvamte,
lashed another of its tendrils towards me. I ducked and threw myself into the driver's seat. Assuming control, I threw it into drive and slammed my foot on the accelerator. We locked gaze one last time.
Burn in hell.
In an instant, the car collided head-on with the entity and everything went blank. Everything was a blank space of white, completely empty. I couldn't see anything, feel anything. Am I dead? Slowly, gradually, I began to see shapes and colors take form. These soon began to take on a familiar appearance. It was the parking lot again, just like it was before I'd left. Everything was normal again. And yet at the same time, it wasn't. The colors, the sounds, the people, they were there, sure, but something was different now. I don't really know how to best describe it. Maybe like I was looking at the world through a camera filter. Like I wasn't seeing the world anymore, or not with my own eyes.
My eyes are open. I can finally see the real world.
Officer Wade came rushing out with the Publix.
You all right, ma'am?
I just looked at him. He looked different now, too. Everyone looked different. They all looked like grey cutouts.
What the hell is this? Why does everyone look so different now? Why do they look like this? Their eyes are still closed, but mine have been open. Ma'am, I snapped back to Officer Wade's voice. Are you okay? I cleared my throat. Yeah, I replied half-heartedly. My mind was both blank and cluttered at the same time. Distant, and yet there. On Earth, yet galaxies away at the same time, you know. Yeah, I'm fine. I then remembered Officer Vega. What happened? Where's Officer Vega? He looked confused. Officer Vega? He asked, cocking his eyebrows. Who's that? Your partner, the one who was supposed to escort me home. He just stared back at me, bewildered, not having a clue as to who the hell I was talking about. Ma'am, I'm afraid you must be mistaken. I don't know any Officer Vega. My partner's Officer Greer here. He then pointed over to the entrance to a man I didn't at all recognize. He was shorter, more muscular looking, with a military-styled buzz cut. I was confused. What the hell happened to Officer? And then it hit me. It was just like he said earlier. They must have taken him, unmade him, just like they did with... Where is he? I blurted. Who? The man that attacked me, the fallen angel killer. Once again, he looked utterly dumbfounded. Well, someone attacked you, Mom? He asked. My blood went cold. Not from fear, but rather from sheer realization. The kind of feeling you get when you reveal some great and horrible truth. Everything was back to normal, yet nothing was the same. He explained to me that they got a call about a possible shoplifter, and they just happened to see me out in the parking lot looking winded. I barely listened to him when he explained this. I know what really happened, but he doesn't, and neither does anyone else. They never will. Their eyes aren't open. They can't see them, but I can. I tried searching for the man, the murders, any headlines of the search for him, but it's no use. Neither he nor any of his victims can be found anywhere anymore. They can't be found because they no longer exist. Unmade. To the best, as I understand it, these events happened only a couple of days ago. Since then, I've seen the world this way. Normal, yet different. I feel different too. I feel faster, more perceptive than normal. I've found that I can move faster than normal perception, causing me to be able to travel from one spot to another quicker than other people can pick up on. Just like him. I think I understand it clearer now. I conquered my fear, breaking their control over me, and now I've become elevated. I'm not just human anymore. I'm more than that now. I'm free. My eyes are open. And despite this, I can see them now too. Oh, they're everywhere, pulling the strings of everyone around me. No one else can see this, but I can. I know they're after me, which is why I have to end this now. I'm going to leave you with this. These things that act beyond our bounds, beyond the veil, as you say it, they're everywhere. And they only want one thing: control. I fear being known, though, being seen. And they can be seen. All you have to do is open your eyes. My father was a police detective in Texas. One of his cases still has him question what kind of evil humans are really capable of. By Crest O. Razors. I'm originally from Ireland, as was my father and his ancestors. Originally, they were among the wealthiest people in the country, until the damn blight hit. After its rampage, my ancestors slowly moved from poverty into what I'd say is upper middle class to the lower part of the upper class. Not really rich, but enough to indulge in expensive things like boats and art. Tired of the constant harassment from the English folk in his hometown, and in Britain itself, where he frequently visited to do business,
he moved to the United States in 1948. He originally served in the Second Great War and was a hero amongst his comrades, saving their lives from the likes of Nazis and Japanese forces. After serving there, he settled in Massachusetts, where he got a job at a police station about a half-mile from Worcester, which only accepted him because he was a smartass and could easily tell if someone was lying. There he worked on several cases, even on the infamous Whitey Bulger case. However, he got bored and soon moved down south, to a relatively decent-sized town about an hour from Dallas. There he was one of, if not the best on the force. He would always wear a dark suit jacket, light brown leather pants, and dark shoes to fit with a blue tie. His green eyes, dark brown hair, tall and slightly muscular build were enough to make you question if you should even spit at him, but, well, I'm getting off track. So, one night when he was finishing his paperwork, he received a letter from a man named Emil Powers. Emil told him in the letter that his daughter was missing, and attached was a sketch of the abductor, or what looked like it. Till morning, he thought to himself. When his boss, Mr. E, arrived at the office, he immediately told him about the letter. Despite not having a good relationship with Mr. E, my father could tolerate him. Now, E was a notorious supporter of segregation and discrimination, which my father hated with all his heart and soul, since he'd experienced it firsthand in England, and even in Texas. Well, son, this ain't nothing like I ever seen since I was a small fella. Why don't you put it aside and focus on another case? One regarding, not them folk, he said. I prefer this case, my father answered. Mr. E knew there was no change in my father's mind. He was a lot taller and not willing to take any of his shit, but still, he stood firm. You fuckers are always so firm like stone. That's why I like you, and why you got the job. You ain't willing to back down, even if the odds are against you 99 to 1. Hell, if I said no, you'd have sued my ass. I'm not willing to take that chance to an Irish drunk bastard. Mr. E shrugged. My father could take it. He'd been called worse. Instead of saying anything back, he just stared blankly at him. I shall do as you wish. I'll work on that case when you're complete with your other. Hell, get the hell out of my office before I cut your paycheck, Mr. E shouted. My father, from now on we'll call him Liam, our family's most common name, left the office and sat at his desk. He began his work on the disappearance of a 14-year-old girl who'd vanished seemingly without so much as a trace just days prior to him joining the police. Attached was a sketch of the person who was supposedly responsible for the disappearance. Little did he know that what he was dealing with was the work of a madman, or, as others say, a serial killer. Liam worked day in and day out, up at 4 a.m. and leaving at 11 p.m., never wishing to be late and always giving us good-night hugs while we slept like logs outside a cabin, waiting to be chopped and hauled into the burning flames that keep humanity warm. And his reasoning was that crime never sleeps, so neither should he. I wanted to let him sleep so I could take care of his work, but he told me to follow my own dreams. I knew I couldn't convince my old man, so I let him be. One day he came across a link between his previous case, the one involving the 14-year-old girl's disappearance, and Emil's letter. He noticed that both of the victims described in the cases were last seen near telephone poles, and that the sketches of the supposed abductors were eerily similar. Both had the same nose, same hairstyle, shoulder length, and a green 1963 Chevrolet pickup truck, and eerily similar license plates, with the last number being either a 5, 6, or 9. Maybe it was just another coincidence, like he'd received several times, but, well, this was all too similar. He drove out to Emil's address and knocked on the door. A skinny, slightly shorter than my father, African-American man came out and asked Liam what he wanted. Is, Mr. Emil Powers home? I'd like to speak with him, he asked. Why the hell did he go with someone like you? You're white folk. White and black folk ain't supposed to be among nothing, the man responded. Well, I, didn't know that. I'm not from around here, sorry, Liam answered. Well, then where are you from, boy? He asked. Ireland. Moved here to escape harassment, but seems it's here too, Liam said.
You ain't seen nothing yet. Worst yet to come. Excuse me if I burst your bubble. Hey, Emil! Get your ass downstairs this goddamn minute. Some person here wants to speak, the man shouted.
Coming, Darius, a voice likely Emil's said. Suddenly a man roughly Darius's height came rushing down the steps. He carried his suit jacket in one arm and papers in the other.
Oh, sorry. Had to get some paperwork done for my daughter's funeral. You must be with the police squad, Emil asked.
I am. I'm sorry for your loss. I'm here to discuss the letter you wrote.
Where was she last seen, as in her location?
Liam asked.
Berkeley's, near the post office. Told her to get me some chips for a barbecue we was going to have. Waited for about an hour, since there's a lot of flavors there. Don't take her an hour to choose, so thought she was saying hi to her friends or at their house without my knowledge. So when I called, they told me she wasn't there. Said someone who claimed to be a relative got her, but then went the opposite of this place,
Emil answered. Liam asked several more questions, but I could never remember them. He thanked Emil and left. He headed to his office and sat down with the new information he'd received. Placed both cases on his desk, side by side. Liam looked at the cases, papers upon papers of the case files, descriptions, backgrounds, and other unimportant things that didn't matter to him. He worked until he fell asleep at his desk. Around 8 a.m., he was woken up by his boss.
"How the fuck are you doing sleeping on the job?" he shouted.
"Sorry, sir. Lost track of time from working too late," he replied.
"Well, you tell that to me when I lose track of your goddamn paychecks,"
Mr. E spat. Liam said nothing, just went back to reading the cases. But trouble was brewing for him, so he decided to visit Emil again, and the other family, the Antoninos. First he visited Emil at his workplace, a diner named V's.
"Oh, you again? What'd you want from me? Can't you read the sign?"
Emil asked. Liam looked at the sign, reading colored only. It was still the mid-60s, and the Civil Rights Act was still months away.
I don't care for signs. They're just words. Also, those folks wouldn't want a drunk like me," Liam smirked. "You, sir, a strange fella. Surprised you don't go for the whites-only places," Emil said.
"Well, I've never done so. Most people treat me differently because I have a different bloody voice," Liam added.
"Oh, damn, son. Well, what can I get you?"
Emil asked. "Just a cheeseburger, fries, Coke, and a chocolate milkshake," he answered.
"All right, coming right up,"
Emil replied. As the food was cooking, Liam took out his notebook and pen.
"Right, I have some questions.
First one. What was the last number on the license plate that supposedly took your daughter? From what I could gather, the number seems to be a 5, 6, or 9.
I need to know what the number is,"
Liam asked.
"I don't know nothing. From what I could tell, some man who saw the whole damn encounter saw the plate and said the number was a 5. Well, some other who saw it and said it was a 6. And there's my brother. He said it was a 9. That's for what I think. Well, it's a 5 from what I've made out,"
Emil answered. He placed the food in front of Liam, who began eating.
"So, don't eat a lot of fast food?"
Emil asked. Not really. I usually eat my sandwich around this time, but, well, Judy brought me here," Liam answered. He looked around to see other people coming in.
"Hey, Emil, why you let white folk in here?"
the man asked. "I'm here on official business. Now, do any of you know anything about the disappearance of his daughter?" Liam replied. The place went silent. No one made a sound. The people all looked at each other, and then one man stepped forward.
"I do remember one thing.
I was doing some yard work with my parents. I remember when I was getting some water from the hose in the back of the house. There's a road there and one in the front. When I was done, I heard an ear-piercing scream. After I dropped my bucket, I saw the truck, which is where you got the description from. Managed to get a single photo before the truck sped off. After that, I called the police, but they said it was nothing," the man said.
"Well, that can do some good," Liam added.
He left after finishing his food, and soon went to the Antonino's house. After knocking on the door, a short Italian man came to open. "What can I do for you?" he asked.
"Is Anthony home?"
Liam asked. "Yeah, he's here. Boy, get your ass the fuck down here this fucking instant. You're gonna see Mars," the man yelled.
"Si, Papa,"
another man's voice said. Then he stumbled down the stairs.
"Ah, great, another drunk."
"Go to hell, piece of shit," Anthony sighed.
"Look, I'm only going to ask you some questions. Now, where were you when your sister was taken from this place?"
Liam asked. "Dunno. Why don't you ask my fist?" Anthony asked. "Hey!" the man, his father, spat. "Fine, I'll answer. I was out with some friends just chilling at Vito's. All of a sudden, we got ourselves some tough guy who wanted to take us for some fun. And we says no, but he insists we do. About several minutes of this shit, he snaps and drives off and takes off towards my place. Well, I thinks he don't want to go to my place, but big fucking mistake. As soon as I get back, my sister's gone. Truck looked the same as the one I saw at Vito's, as Paps described it," Anthony explained.
"Well, did either of you see the license plate? What was the last number of it?"
"Well, what I saw was a 6, the father, Will, answered. "Well, I saw a 9, Anthony said.
"Well, thank you for your time. If you have anything more, please contact me."
As Liam left, Anthony flipped up his middle finger. "Irish trash," he shouted.
Liam just shrugged his head.
He drove home to continue his work in his office. As he turned left, right, then left again onto the street near his, he noticed something from the corner of his eye. He pulled over and saw the truck, battered and lying in a ditch behind several trees.
"Damn, how the hell did I miss this?"
he asked himself. He called Emil to tell him of the truck's location.
"I'll be there in the morning. It's late. Maybe this can lead to my daughter. God, I hope so,"
he said. The next morning, Emil arrived and saw the truck.
"My God."
Will and Anthony were then called. Anthony was soon flooded with memories of that night. The man from the restaurant was called and was brought before the truck. Both remembered it and correctly identified it as the truck that they'd seen.
"The only question is, who owns it or who stole it?"
Emil asked.
"Well, I'll work on that now," Liam replied. "Thank you. I owe my life to you, pal,"
Emil added. "Well, I can ask for you if I need you, like Batman and Robin," Liam said. He drove off to find out who owned that particular green truck. It would take him a great many weeks to find the one. Emil went back home and decided to explore the woods behind his house. He took his shotgun and ventured with his dog into the forest. As Emil readied his gun, his dog barked loudly, so Emil left his gun in a spot. He ran over to the canine's howling, tripping over twigs, fallen branches, and other things on the Texas forest floor.
"What the hell are you barking at, Harvey? What's—" "Oh, Jesus Christ," Emil shouted.
"What is it, hon?" his wife Susan asked.
"Oh, come see this."
Well, Susan wept and screamed as soon as she saw the bodies in the trees. The police took the decomposed, blood-soaked remains to the autopsy room. There, they were identified as Emil's long-lost daughter Francine and Will's daughter Viviana. Both bodies show sign of cuts and blunt force trauma. It was concluded that they'd been killed by blunt force. Their bodies appeared to have been placed there, so the location of the actual killings was unknown. Liam was called in, and he immediately knew that this was the work of a madman. Liam soon arrived at Emil's house. He barged past him with a force like that of a train hitting an elephant. He quickly arrived in the woods and saw the tree where the two bodies had been found. There were still bloodstains on the bark of the tree. Liam put his fingers on the bark, the blood seeping onto them.
"Oh, Jesus," he said. "Whoever did this is a frickin' monster. I want his damn head on a spike,"
Emil shouted. Well, the police who were there looked at Liam, wanting him to think of something quick.
Hey, analyze this. I'm going to a car dealership, one that sells these, he said.
He looked inside the truck for anything useful.
Well, there was next to nothing in it, except for some receipts, a knife, a .22 caliber handgun, and another paper that had faint words, barely readable, saying Fabio's garage. Well, that's what he thought he saw in it anyway. He drove to Fabio's garage. He exited his blue 1965 Ford Mustang and approached the owner, the aforementioned Fabio.
"How can I help you today?" Fabio asked.
"Do you perhaps know of someone who bought a green 1963 Chevrolet pickup truck?" he asked.
"I'm sorry, but several people buy the same damn truck. Can you be more specific, eh?" Fabio replied.
Liam held up the license plate, which he'd secretly taken from the back since the front was buried in the dirt.
Yeah. I believe that was given to Andre Hopkins. Never thought he'd be caught in this shitfest," Fabio added.
"Look, I'm sorry for disturbing you. I know this is a lot," Liam said. Then he left to find Andre. Andre lived in a rundown part of the city. Liam approached and knocked on the door. "Please, open up, Andre. I just want to talk," he said, knocking on the door violently. No answer, so Liam knocked again. "Open the goddamn door, damn it," Liam shouted.
"Fuck off,"
a voice shouted back. "Andre, I just want to talk."
"Fourth Amendment, fucker,"
the voice replied. "Oh, Andre, we can do this the easy way or the hard way," Liam shouted. Suddenly a large, overweight young man came to the door. His clothes were slightly tattered and covered in a red liquid. "What the hell you want?" he asked. "Andre, I just want to talk. Where were you when Emil Power's daughter and William Antonino's daughter were kidnapped and killed?" "I was driving around after drinking. I had picked up some folks and brought them to the forest for some bird watching," Andre answered. "Who were the people you picked up? What was the forest like?" "Young kids, both girls. Had a fun time. Screamed on the way there. They were too damn happy." "And, what were their names?" Liam asked. "Some Italian name and black girl. Francine." "Did you put them in the tree?" Liam asked. "Only for the bird watching. They wouldn't shut the hell up about going home, so I beat them. Oh, might have killed them." "Can I come in?" "Sure." Liam entered the next to run-down apartment. There were beer bottles, pornographic magazines, and papers everywhere. He listened as Andre described his life. And then, as Andre held up a gun, he pointed it at Liam. "You know, I just realized your voice sounds funny. You ain't from around here. You're from out of the country. You know what? Folks like you deserve to go the fuck back to your home country." And with that, he fired the gun at Liam, but missed. He then began to grab a beer bottle, but was tackled by Liam before he could throw it. "Get your damn filthy hands off of me," Andre shouted. "Andre Hopkins, you're under arrest for the murders of Viviana Antonino and Francine Powers, along with attempting to assault a police detective." Liam then pushed the sloppily dressed man into the back of his car in cuffs. He delivered him to the station, where Mr. E spat at him. After several hours of interrogation, Andre was housed in the holding cell, where he'd be transferred to a jail. He was finally brought to trial nearly 2 years later. My father told me all about this trial, but I fell asleep since it was so long and boring. Andre, according to my father, pleaded not guilty by cause of insanity, though the judge and jury weren't having it. He was sentenced to 100 years for Francine's murder and given the death sentence for Viviana's. As he was let out, he shouted at Liam, Will, and Emil, swearing at all of them. For years, Andre sat on death row, awaiting the time
to meet his maker. But just 3 hours before he was scheduled to die by the chair, something came in. The federal government had just abolished the death penalty. Andre, along with the other death row inmates across the country, had their sentences commuted to life in prison. Andre, being a dangerous offender, was given no chance of parole for 100 years. Funny, since that meant he would never get out. Nope, Andre would never get to experience the freedoms of other non-death row prisoners, like shopping, seeing family, and all the other stuff. But one night, when my father was eating his dinner sandwich, he received word of something that would haunt him. Emil called him and said the words that made my father drop his food, making it fall harder than Hannibal's elephants did when they fell trying to cross the mountains on their way to Rome.
Yeah, Andre Hopkins just escaped. Prison officials let him go shopping for his good behavior. He just vanished like a ghost,
Emil said. So he was out. Not by him being released from prison, but because he had escaped. Now he was on the run and was lurking out in the shadows. Liam ran outside and panted, looking around his property in hopes to catch this deranged motherfucker.
He'd worked for weeks, months on end,
to find and then get this psychopathic monster behind bars, so that he wouldn't harm another hair on another's soul. But now, he was out there, possibly looking for him.
Right. You're here. Come on, where are you?
He muttered to himself. When he was angry, no one would dare cross his path. If they did, they'd feel the wrath of God and his army coming down upon them like a heavy rainfall during a monsoon. He huffed and went back into the house, and decided then to go back to work. While working on the case of Andre's disappearance, he would hear strange noises from inside the house. Thinking it was probably just his kids or his pets, he tried to shake it off, but what he would hear would nonetheless make him shudder. Something, or rather someone very familiar, was inside the walls, waiting to strike him at the perfect moment. After several years of Andre being free and on the run, Liam continued the hunt for him. It was 1978 now, and Liam started working on some unsolved cases from El Paso and Houston. Around this time I was only 20 and had moved away, not knowing what my father was doing since I didn't read the local paper or see him too often. He was always working, even on holidays. Like a kid at a candy store, he could just never stop. Liam was busy filing his cases so he could focus on other things. Despite his frustration, he was not willing to give in. Most of the squad, including Mr. E, had given up and said, well, Andre had probably died, or someone had gotten to him. One day, after hours of working, he went outside to get some sun. He didn't usually get much, and the doctor had recommended he did, so he wouldn't become like Dracula at only 56. He was upset by this, but soon realized that this would eventually lead to more grisly findings. Well, Emil was around and would also step in to help. Now Mr. E, although not entirely for this, eventually let Emil help. He'd had a change of heart since reading the works of Malcolm X and Martin Luther King. And one night, as Liam walked along his back porch, he smelled something foul, like a dead animal. He went to investigate and track this smell. The odor led him to a patch of bushes. And when Liam approached it, he gasped. There lay the body of a young boy, looked to be about age 6 or 7. He had bruises on his left arm, and his right arm was missing. Liam found it in a stream nearby. Emil contacted him to tell him he'd found the remains of another child in the woods, albeit a different tree from where his daughter had been found. Liam called his police friends, and they arrived within the hour. Liam was questioned, and the houses were quickly searched.
We're gonna have to go somewhere. Hotel, maybe.
Fine. I just hope it's not for too long, his wife Mavie answered. So they packed some things for a hotel and let the police do their work. Liam would go back and help, and he'd soon learn from the locals that more bodies of young women A man and more children had been found. Some were near the highway, others in the forest, and others nearer the houses. Only one of the family members of one of the victims came forward to help give a description of the killer, now dubbed the Texas Killer. Liam would get his hands on the sketch and notice some odd details. The way it was drawn, it was similar to that of Andre. Wow, was he out there, needing to be caught? He was, before he struck again.
Damn, that dirty son of a bitch, Liam muttered.
And so he drove, for hours and hours on end, but not finding a damn trace of Andre. Then, when he finally got home, he heard the noise. Well, the police had done their research in the house and had left. Liam grabbed a knife from the kitchen. He was ready to strike.
"Who's there?"
he asked. Nothing. Just silence and the darkness in front of him. And then another creak came from inside the house.
"Hey, I ain't fucking around. Come on, coward, show yourself."
Then, with a loud thump, a man bolted towards Liam, pounding him to the floor before he began to shoot at him.
"Andre, what the hell are you doing here?"
Liam asked.
"I might as well get my vengeance on you, Irish donkey, putting me away. You had some balls for that. Well, let me see you go to hell."
Maeve had gotten out of the car and shrieked when she saw his face. Andre then bolted towards her, knocking her down and violently assaulting her. Liam tried to fight back, but was knocked to near unconsciousness. Andre had soon dragged Maeve into the bedroom and had begun to rip her clothes off. He then tried to force himself upon her as she cried out violent, hot tears of fear. Liam was next to passing out, and with all his remaining strength, he called Emile and Will and told them to come to the house and also to call the police. Emile did so, and then he arrived at the house with a shotgun, while Will came with a butcher's knife.
"Get the fuck away from her, you dirty-ass pig,"
Emile shouted. Andre ran past Emile, knocking the gun from his hands. He then found one of Liam's pistols and grabbed it. And then he ran. He left the building and made his way to a neighbor's house, where he broke in and grabbed hold of their kid. He came out slowly, with the gun aimed at the kid's head.
"Come on, you fuckers. You bring me back to prison. Do it, or this kid meets his maker,"
Andre shouted. Then Liam limped out, gun in hand.
"Don't shoot to kill. Shoot to injure, you hear that? Oh, I want this bastard alive,"
Liam ordered as the police arrived.
"Please, sir, don't,"
the boy cried.
"Look, this doesn't have to be like this, Andre. Let him go,"
Liam begged.
So he can go back to his perfect family? No. Hey, I never had that chance. My father was a fucking pig. No job, he drank, he was so abusive. I wanted that old man dead, and I got my wish when he got the chair. Hey, I never have a happy life, so why should others?
Look, not all families are perfect.
No family's perfect, not even mine, hell. I spent most of my time hunting for you. Barely got to say hello to my children,
Liam answered.
Yeah, still better than what God gave me. He fucked me over too many times, and now I repay the favor by doing the same to him. See how he likes it.
Liam lowered his pistol, placed his hands on his hips. But Andre wasn't having it. He shot the boy in the head.
No!
Emile shouted. Liam ran towards Andre, who by now fled into the woods. He fired, and so did Andre. It wasn't until Andre had either lost his breath or tripped over a branch that he was caught. Well, he heavily resisted, and so had to be subdued. And he eventually was caught and arrested. At the separate trials, he pled not guilty to all of the counts. He eventually was charged with 12 counts of murder, 5 counts of attempted murder, 2 counts of kidnapping, 7 of rape, and 2 counts of escaping the law. In the end, he received 9 death sentences, 3 life sentences, 4 20-year sentences, 8 10-year sentences, and 6 5-year sentences. He just smiled when he heard all of this. When it came to the life and death sentences, though, he wailed and wailed. In the end, some of his death sentences were commuted to life, reducing the number of death sentences to only 5. He spent several more years on death row, always denying his guilt. He would file for appeal several times, but would be denied every single one. Then the day came, April of 1997, and my father asked me to come with him. I obliged, being the decent son that I am. Andre's last meal was a cheeseburger, French fries, a Coke, and a chocolate milkshake, just like my father had had when he was at Emil's. "Why did you choose to eat that?" Liam asked. "Simple. 'Cause you did," Andre answered, smiling an evil grin. "Why of all people me?" Liam asked. "Did you not see me? I was there at Emil's when you were questioning him. I was in the window. He had every chance to catch me, but said no to it. So tell me, Irishman, are you really the genius you think you are? 'Cause you'd have noticed me," Andre answered, smiling his evil smile once more. "Hey, time to go, Hopkins," the guard said. Andre took his last shower and spoke with the priest. We weren't allowed to hear the words due to confidentiality, and because he told us not to. My father, myself, along with the victims' families, Emil, some of Andre's family, and Will and Anthony all gathered in the watching room. As the curtains were drawn, Andre lay on the gurney, flat and motionless, completely drained of any emotion. "Andre Hopkins, you've been tried, convicted, and sentenced to death by the state of Texas for the murders of..." He began to list the names of the victims. I couldn't remember most, only some like Taylor Pearl, Kendricks Henderson, and Faith Sylvia. "Do you have any last words?" the chaplain asked. "I know what I did was right. God always told me to piss off, so I told him to do the same. Come to think of it, I'm a sinner. I've caused hell for everyone, and I deserve to suffer because of it. I hope I can go in peace, knowing I'm no better than a street rat," Andre said, crying and in conflicting tones. No one could really know if he was sorry at all, or if he was just faking it to get his death sentence commuted so that he'd have a chance to escape and kill more kids. As the injection process began, his eyes rolled back and he lay stone cold, not moving. He was pronounced dead at 7:15 p.m. The warden said this was one of the fastest executions, as they usually take hours. But after that, my father and I hugged. Then we left that godforsaken prison and headed back to civilization. My father went on to live until 2017, to the ripe old age of 96. Emil lived until he was 92 in 2019, and Will made it to 87. He died about a decade or so after Andre had. Anthony, Emil's son Henry, and I lived relatively close to one another, and we're all still friends. Since then, I haven't talked about Andre to anyone, though. I prefer to keep that memory locked away for when my kids get older. Maybe it's best if I never tell them. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this story today. It really means a lot to me and to the author of the story, of course. Well, if you want to know more about me, I'm pretty much everywhere on social media. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can download my music on SoundCloud. I've got a Patreon if you feel like. Throw me $1 or $2. Very much appreciated. And of course, on Reddit, I have a place where you can leave stories if you want me to read one that you've written. Well,
Hoping to see you all again very soon. Till then, sweet dreams. Bye-bye.